Although they did start working with the Beals revolver in the year of 1856, it would not be the same as what you think of the Remington New Model Army today.
And if you're like me, you're into the history stuff, the books, you like the guns, are worth their weight in gold. Because a gun, it's fun to shoot, it's fun to point with, but without the story there, if you're a history person like I am, without the story, it really doesn't mean all that
Ruger Security 9.
Can I redraw?
You already looked?
No.
You sure
right.
you did?
Now on 3.
Another pro, at least a pro to me, is these guns are kind of a project. I like to look at them as I'm getting an advanced kit build in the mail whenever I get one. So it's a project that you can go down the road and you can either leave it as...
Most people believe that the Walker was Colt's first extent to a very, very large pistol, but it wasn't. This was. This is Colt's 1839 to patent firearms revolving carbine pistol. It is massive.
I think your mic is cut off there.
Now we're better, right?
Now.
Once again, we're late and it's all my fault.
I'm blaming Duke. I'm just blaming Duke just because.
I got this thing fired up this morning and forgot to send out the emails.
Yeah, don't blame me because he's sitting there telling me, get on the chat, get on the chat. Well, send me the link. Send me the link.
We're working on making it where we're all administrators so we can all run everything. At the moment, at the the pay plan we are on only allows for 2 administrators at a time. So I got to get it over to Duke because he's the guy that has all the page stuff. Usually he wants to show off. So
just remember, when we all have administrators, like all administrators, this is going to get crazy. You think it's bad now? Wait till he's in.
So I'm gonna have to lean on Duke heavily tonight because I have been bone blacking a stock in the past couple days, and no matter how hard I scrub, it's not coming off. And I'm not touching that Alfresca leather brown book with these hands. So
I could make a.
I know you could.
What movie? I'm having a brain fart.
Oh,
see, it's
man.
coming off.
Well, I still took the hide off with it. Okay, so we got some people in here. We're going to talk about the guns a little, Bighorn. Something I think we're all a little bit passionate about, and we all have different points of view on. So one thing I'm going to say is Duke is pretty studied up on this, and he's made a lot of good videos and stuff. I've been studying it recently. I've come across some stuff recently that I thoroughly enjoyed reading. I really like studying the single-shot rifles a little, Bighorn, on both sides, and there was actually a lot of them. Duke is really studied up on those 66 Henrys, 66 Winchesters, or Henrys. Duke can talk about that in a second. And Snapper's up on the single-action armies and the handguns. So, not that Duke's not up on all of it, but here we go. Right. Madras Arsenal's here. Says, can't wait to see Antique Gunslingers in. Hiram Hillbilly said, I'm excited to watch because it's always a pleasure learning from you all. Thank you. R3383 said, hello, can't wait. Jeremy Gunslinger said, hey, how's everyone tonight? Diane Houston says, hello all. Lagging Leland said the reload show. Yes, sir. Louisiana Gray said it won't be long now. Madras Arsenal said, good evening, gents. I'm really looking forward to this discussion. Snapper, well, he's in here and says Duke. And 11 Bang Bang's in. Lagging Leland, I'm looking for any questions right off the bat. And Doug Dukes is in. Hi, Doug. He said, hey, Doug. All good things come to those that wait, or something like that. Good evening. Jeremy P's in. Said, finally got fresh banjo strings in the mail this weekend. Everyone thankful for the live stream. Gunsmith 4570 says, good evening. And Angry Ranger says, don't sweat the small stuff, Snapper. We're a patient bunch. Gunsmith 4570, all good things come to those that wait. IWS Bull 1 is in. Kerry Suttlemeyer is in. Madras said it's okay. Custer was running late too. Butch said, I had some friends and family heirlooms from a 1920s picnic at the battlefield. Among the items picked up were fired 44 Henry rounds, some of them with 4 firing pin dents, meaning they misfired. That's something we're going to get into, I guarantee it. 11 Bang Bang, Ethan says, you're late. Shame, shame. I think we're up now, Kerry Sotomayor. Should be up on all 3 channels. Saboteur 45's in. Howdy. Antique Gunslinger, Vaquero Joel says, greetings, everyone. Frank Collis says, I got a Uberti 1847 Walker for hunting. What's the best way to carry this huge weapon when you go hiking? Get to that in just a second. That'll be the first question before we take off. Mill Creek Range is in here. Says, looking forward to learning something new. Yeah, sorry. I was going to say, Benji, I forgot to send you an email, but I'm going to put off the big chat until a few more weeks. I hope to have you back on. Louisiana Gray said, finally got my hands on 49 Pocket Colt this weekend at the gun show. You're right. That hammer is a beast. Original, yes.
People don't understand that. It's a massive difference between the originals and the replicas. The replicas, they're like not even a quarter of the strength as the originals.
Lagging Leland said, realistically, who's the best shot out of you 3? I'm going to say Duke because he can kill a GoPro at 300 yards with a handgun through a gopher hole. Yep. Madras Arsenal has a question. I'll get to that when we start here. Jeremy P has a question. Kerry Sotomayor said, yeah, I got all 3 going at once, you silly humans. Brandon Birch is in, said, awesome, see y'all again, and that's where we're going to start. Real quick, nice. off topic, Duke, let's go through this. Someone I can't remember who it was, bought a Walker for hunting. What's the best way to carry it, historically and?
Buy a horse.
That was actually it's exactly what I was going to say. So get a horse.
Not a horse pistol because it can kill a horse at 100 yards. It's a horse pistol because you need it to drag it 100 yards. No, Cabela's has, and I've got one of them laying around here somewhere, but Cabela's used to sell a holster specifically for the Walker. The only problem is you put it on your belt. I could never draw it high enough to get the barrel past it. So cross draw works really well. And with that long of a gun, I've got a cross draw Ford August style. I don't even bother with a tie down strap because that gun's so long, it just wants to naturally just stay in it.
You're not making holsters for sale though at the moment, are you?
No, I've kind of cut out on the holsters. I got one here I got to ship out because the guy finally got back to me on it. So it's getting ready to go here pretty quick. But right now, yeah, I've been taking a break from leather work, just enjoying life.
Yep. And
I do that every now and then.
Basically, the Gus is a Slim Jim cross draw, in a way, I would say. And the best thing about that is you slap it on that side and it doesn't stick down. I've carried it before, but you're going to invest in a good holster and a good set of suspenders. So anyway, on to the subject at hand. This is one of our favorite subjects, and I think Duke's.
This is like my favorite time period as well. The early to mid 1870s, even up to the early 1880s, is my favorite. That is my favorite.
All right, so I think we had the first question outside of the Walker was Madras Arsenal said, okay, first question, if the 7th Cavalry had taken their sabers, how would that have affected the outcome?
Wouldn't have affected it because
I don't think it would have made a difference.
Both sides. Now, see, sabers played roles during Red Cloud's War, and just prior to Red Cloud's War. So in the 1860s, they played a role, and the big reason for that is the natives didn't really have a lot of guns at that point. So it's a lot of hand-to-hand combat. Fetterman fight was predominantly hand-to-hand and bow and arrow, but bow and arrow is pretty short range. Shorter, I should say, than what the muskets would do. But anyway, yeah, the Sabers played a role there. There was one incident, I can't remember exactly which one it was, but there was a bunch of warriors facing off in the cavalries during the Powder River expedition, Connor's Powder River expedition in 1865. And the warriors had stated, their thing that they've done this and this, and that the bullets would not harm them. And so they lined up for battle, and they're all ripping and roaring because these bullets ain't going to touch a single one of them. And the cavalry draws their sabers, and every warrior leaves. Well, they prepared their medicine for bullets, and they didn't think about sabers. And I think that was the last really effective use of the saber in the field. But anyway, it wouldn't have helped because at this point, in 1876, the natives have repeating arms, and they're able to pick off soldiers, 100 yards or, up to 100 yards anyway. And, it don't matter what firearm you go against. Every firearm produced at this point has more range than what a saber has.
That's what I was going to say. I believe from everything I've read, the saber's on its way out for most of this style fighting because they have a Colt revolver.
Yep.
And
honestly, sabers are really starting to make their way out by the late 1860s, and by the 1870s, they're just decoration.
So the next question would be along those same lines. You probably know this, Duke. Is there an issued knife?
Yeah, there was. As you start getting into the late 1870s, and I don't remember. I don't think there was an issued knife here in 1876 for Little Bighorn. There was the trowel bayonet, which had come out 72, 74. And if you ever seen one of those things, they are ugly looking things, but that's just for the infantry. But basically take like a mason's trowel, that triangular trowel, make it really thick, and then put an attachment to use it as a bayonet. And
then tell the soldiers don't dig in that hard Kansas prairie with the rifle on the end of it and see how well that goes.
Yeah. That was the whole idea, is it was supposed to be an entrenching tool and a bayonet. Well,
I don't think they meant for him to leave it on the gun.
Let's just leave it on the end of the gun and dig into the dirt. Guess where the dirt goes? Right on up the barrel.
And I can't imagine the barrel's any good either after a few runs of that. Anybody who's tried to dig in that prairie sod up there in the north and central Kansas knows I would be very highly tempted. And it's kind of funny because the stories I've been reading, because I was studying the blanket gun a little bit and how it's actually not really that big of a thing. I mean, it is a thing, but it's not. It's like they don't make them that way. Nobody made them that way. They had to have a gun that blew up or it was like unusable. But what I found interesting was these guns that tended to blow the ends of the barrels out, like if they had stress around the end of the barrel and they cut them off, well, the natives would hammer the end of it out where it was blown out and make a shovel out of the end of that barrel, right? And pry bars. And not only natives, miners did that too. I think somebody did that to a bunch of Hawkins, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. Alexander Hamilton, my 60 years on the plains, talks about they took their Hawken rifles down, had the ends hammered out and turned into crowbars to mine for gold. And when they went and bought Sharps rifles because the Sharps were starting to come out about then.
Yeah. There was one more thing I wanted to address at this angle, and it's also kind of the snapper's point of view. But I mean, the 73, and I don't know, Snapper, you can address this, but the 73 single action Army, it's just the Army, Colts Army model at that point. How long had that been in the hands of troopers? Because I'm not studied up on that far of that in 70.
So I know when the 7th Cavalry got theirs. They got theirs in late 73, early 74. They were part of the Lot 5 shipment of 1,000 guns per lot. They ended up with Lot 5, 6, and 7. So the guns that would have been with them Actually, no, I think they got it in 74. Later 74 when they first got their guns. I just read up on this just to make sure I had it in my mind. But the guns that would have been in this were in the low 5,000s to high 7,000s ish as a good indicator. But you got to realize too that when you're looking at these, a lot of the original guns did survive, just not from the 300 plus men that were wiped out with Custer.
Right.
The rest, like Benteens, all their guys, they kept their guns. Those guns ended up living a long life. They ended up going back to Springfield later on in the 1890s. Those were the ones that were cut down. And it's not uncommon to find a serial number range, like a part on a gun that actually would fit into the lot 5, 6, or 7, but it's attached to a gun with mismatched part numbers. So that's kind of sad too, because if those guns were never sent back out, just those, then they'd be worth a fortune, like an absolute fortune right now. And Springfield, when they took them apart, Colts had a little bit better deal of taking them apart, but at least keeping the serial numbers together. But Springfield definitely did not. They didn't care.
So in the collector's market, that's like finding, like with the trapdoors, Custer serial number range carbines are a huge thing. Even if they're not,
I'm sure.
No guarantee that they were ever there.
Right.
If they're in that serial room, because the funny thing is when they ship those out, the serial numbers never all wound up in the same box. So you could have 1,000 here and then serial number 10,000 be the next issued gun, And so, but if you have that certain serial number range, your carbine's worth 10 times any other carbine. That kind of how there's a range.
Actually, when did Custer leave for the Black Hills expedition?
So, well, he was there
That
in
was
June.
in 1874.
Okay, so they got their single action armies right before they went to on that expedition.
I want to say.
So 74.
Why am I having a brain fart here? I want to say it was June 74.
So he'd already been on the Black Hills expedition for 2 years. Because in
Didn't they come back?
in 73, he was on the Yellowstone campaign.
Yeah, he was on the Yellowstone campaign 73. The Black Hills expedition, when they went out find the gold in the Black Hills, was in the I think it was in the summer of 7. It was in 74, but I think it was in the early summer.
So we can officially differentiate then between the Black Hills campaign and the Centennial campaign.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, the Black Hills campaign is what is going to cause the 1876 conflict.
Gotcha. Well,
We done founded gold.
because I always think of his Kansas time, then I always have to stop and remember that his Kansas Oklahoma time is 68. So that's a long time actually that passed between.
Yeah. Oh, they sit out in July. Yeah, it was
July of 74.
Yep, July 74, July 2nd, and they got back August 30th. They knew it was getting close to August when they once Charlie Reynolds got to Fort Laramie to send out the telegram saying gold had been found.
But that was a really good question, Madras, mostly because there is so much nuance just in the Sabers. The idea was to leave the Sabers behind because they rattled, from what I've understood, right?
Yeah, that was kind of the idea because, 1,000 stampeding horses running at full gallop.
I was about to say,
quiet.
should it not have been known? I mean, I didn't listen to the scouts, obviously, but hadn't the scouts already reported they found our ration on the trail?
Yeah, the idea is because, and you can hear the sabers rattling when you got that many men together, but you're going to hear that many horses running too. It's just that the saber rattling would definitely say this is the cavalry coming, whereas a bunch of animals running, well, that might be a herd of buffalo, that might be another war party of natives.
And people who have never, even cattle, and horses are heavier than cattle, but people who have never stood next to 100 plus, in this case, 200 plus horses or cattle running, it literally does vibrate the ground in a weird way. It's not like you feel an earthquake, but you can feel it in the soles of your feet from 100 yards away. So it's
tanks are the same way, believe it or not. Tanks, they're the same way.
My brother-in-law said he can tell when a steer hits 800 pounds by the way they run down the sorting alley. By the way it sounds when they step. But yeah, but that is very a nuanced thing. And I honestly think the Saber was, like Duke said, on its way out. And that leads to a whole nother thing. The importance of the revolver in this fight that nobody ever talks about. All you ever hear is Custer's guys had single shot rifles. Well, they did, but they also had 6 shots in a revolver. So they technically had 7 shots. But my question is, Duke, when it comes to, not that it made any difference in this case, but when it comes down to the hand-to-hand fighting, supposing there was equal numbers in natives versus soldiers, would the soldiers have been better armed for the short-range fight?
Yeah, I mean, well,
not counting the rifles, but
they'd be on more equal grounds. The other thing you got to remember is these soldiers are all green. Most of the soldiers that are in the 7th right now, good number of them are, at least a third of them are immigrants. They're all new recruits. They don't have the experience. Some of these warriors have been fighting in the Army since Red Cloud's War.
Mm-hmm.
So it's one of those that you've got experienced warriors versus inexperienced soldiers. I don't think a cavalry saber would have made a whole lot of difference. Plus,
it must have been one really bad first taste of combat.
Right. They've got a knife in one hand, tomahawk or war club in the other hand. Yeah, it's not going to make... It would have... if it was equal numbers, I still would put the favor towards the natives at this point.
Yeah. I think you're right. Just because of the not counting... It's not all the guns. It's the men behind the weapons, right? Is what you're saying.
Right.
And you got to remember their families were at the bottom of that hill.
That's true.
That'll light
that makes
fire
a big difference.
But that kind of leads on to... Sorry, go ahead.
Like they say in that movie, Son of the Morning Star, which is, for Hollywood, it's the most accurate of the inaccurate Hollywood movies. But they still get a lot of things wrong. But there's one thing that they say in there is, they say it's Custer's last stand, but really it was the natives' last stand, because this is going to be the really last major victory they have.
I was going to say, Madras, if you want to have a review of Son of the Morning Star on your channel and you're looking for somebody that can talk about it, Duke's your guy.
Yeah.
He's pretty studied in that show.
Like I said, there's some good things in that movie, and there's other things that they gloss over, like the 73 Yellowstone campaigns, never mentioned once. Because that was the first time that Custer was up against Sitting Bull. And, there's a couple other things. The Fetterman fight's not portrayed accurately.
Well, when you're actually a miniseries, especially at that time, it's going to be hard to portray the Fetterman fight accurately and be able to stay on TV.
The thing it was, they had reenactors. I have a friend, he wasn't in that movie, but he was with that group of reenactors that wound up in that one, and then in the movie Crazy Horse and Lakota Woman, and my friend was in both of those. But yeah, they had reenactors at that time. There was big groups of reenactors, and those groups have kind of gone by the wayside. There are still some out there, but they're not like they were back in the 90s.
And to tell you how close that is, you all watched Turkey Creek 1823. That's his father-in-law in the scene where the guy's curling his mustache in camp.
Yeah.
And it's just like Gettysburg and a lot of those miniseries back then where they gave the reenactors kind of reign over how this is going to go. And those shows are so good and so well remembered. Yep. So, but anyway, we spent a lot of time on that question. Going to the next one. They're hitting hard right off the bat. Jeremy P. asked, what was the most used rifle on the Indian side of the battle? Now, we got to break this up. We really have to break this up because contrary to popular belief, there's a whole lot more going on than rifles. And I'm going to throw this one to Duke because he's going to answer this real quick. What was the most used weapon on the Indian side?
On the Indian side, bow and arrow.
Exactly.
Next would be the war club and the knife.
Mm-hmm.
But when you get into firearms, it's actually muzzle loaders. There's quite a few muzzle loaders because them are still being traded left and right. The repeaters are something that's kind of been new, and it was there was a lot of what they called back then mixed blood, I won't use the other term they had for them, but they were the children of traders, trappers, people that come out west, 1830s and 40s, and a lot of them took up the trade of trading with their relatives that are Native Americans, and so there was a few of those guys that were known to trade weapons, repeating arms to the natives, and in early 1876 it was not illegal to do so. So the one of the groups that was supposedly was believed to have been trading arms was the Janisse family, and the Janisse family is a very large family in the Fort Laramie area. They were trading. Very likely the Rishaws, who were married in and relatives of the Janisse family, the Rishaws or the Richards, were likely also involved with that. James Bordeaux, who is a famous trader, he operated Fort Laramie, was Fort John. He was the basically the guy in charge for a long time. Had a trading post for many years. Wound up building the trading post up by Chadron, Nebraska, which is the Museum of the Fur Trade, where it's at now. His son, Louis Bordeaux, was caught trading arms after Grant issued a proclamation in August of 76 that prohibited the trading of arms and ammunition to the natives. So basically stated anybody found in the vicinity of the Indian country with any amount of ammunition which could be considered to be of trade was what they were doing, basically, dealer, that they would have that confiscated as war. How do they word it? Can't remember the exact words, but war material. And Louis Bordeaux got all of his stuff taken. But yeah, that was starting to be traded pretty commonly then, and even at the agencies like Red Cloud Agency, Spotted Tail Agency, the traders, the settlers that are operating at these agencies are trading arms and ammunition to the natives, because the natives that are at the agency, well, they're under the government regulations, are considered non-hostile. They can go out and hunt, they can do whatever they want. So they go in, like, yeah, we're going to buy these guns, this ammunition to go hunting. Okay, here you go. Well, then they go give it to their relatives that are fighting up in the Powder River country, in Montana, all that area. So yeah, that's how they were getting in. So Henry rifles, Winchester 66 rifles were fairly common. Both of them use the same cartridge. So
and I'm looking for it right now, but I have a. I was reading this the other day and I saved it, and so I'm trying to. This is history.net. Not to interrupt you, but not until archaeological, and I'm reading verbatim here the quote. Investigations were conducted on the battlefields of the 1980s did the extent to which the Indians used gunpowder weapons come to light. Modern firearms identification analysis revealed that the Indians had spoken truth about the variety and number of weapons that they carried. Wooden Leg went into battle with what he called a 6-shooter and later captured a Springfield single-shot carbine and 40 rounds of ammunition. Minneconjou One Bull, Sitting Bull's nephew, owned a muzzleloader. The Hunk Papa Iron Hawk and Cheyenne Big Beaver had only bows and arrows. Eagle Elk and Ogallala started the battle with a Winchester. White Cow Bull and Ogallala also claimed to have had a repeater. There are 2,361 cartridges, cases, and bullets recovered from the entire battlefield, which reportedly came from 45 different firearms types, including the Army Springfields and Colts, of course, and represented 371 individual guns. The evidence indicated the Indians used Sharps, Smith & Wessons, Evans, a few Henrys, a few Winchesters, Remingtons, Ballards, Maynards, Stars, Spencers, Enfield, Forehands and Wadsworth, Colt revolvers, and many Springfields of other calibers. There's evidence of 69 individual Army Springfields on Custer's Field, and a square mile section with Custer's 5 companies were dead. But there was also evidence of 62 Indian 44 caliber Henry repeaters, 27 Sharps 50 caliber weapons, And on Custer's Field, there was evidence of at least 134 Indian firearms versus 81 for the soldiers. It appears the Army was outgunned as well as outnumbers. There's one thing I wanted to read here. Reno claimed the Indians had Winchester rifles, and Mike Hall made a large target for them, and they were pumping bullets into it. However, some white survivors claimed to be heavily outgunned. Private Charles Windolph of Company H is the closest to the truth. He estimates half the warriors carried bows and arrows. 1/4 of them carried a variety of old muzzleloaders and single-shot rifles, and 1/4 of them carried modern repeaters. So, I wanted you to see what you thought on that, Duke, because that would significantly, if he was even close, that would take that number down to less than probably 400 repeating rifles on the native side altogether.
Right. And, I'd say that's pretty close to being accurate, but they're talking Winchesters. There's also Spencers.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and Colt revolvers, the old Captain Balls, those were pretty prevalent as well. There's several natives that have them, have old Remingtons and such. But yeah, so you figure about 1,200. That's about the estimated amount of warriors that was there. Even 400 Winchesters.
That's a lot. That'd be way more than.
And each one of them holds, depending on if they're rifle or carbine. But if they're all the standard rifle, which the Henry and the Winchester, I think they both held 16 rounds each. 16 times 400. Somebody do the math for me there. I can't do that in my head.
Well, I always say 2,000 because that's the general unlisted number of guys, right? But then you also have to remember this guy was with Reno's Munch. That's the only reason he's still here to tell the tale.
Yeah,
so,
and Reno didn't get hit that hard.
Yeah,
Pinting didn't get hit that hard.
So I would have to say that if you think 1,200 natives joined the battle altogether.
Well, I think that was about the total number that was all involved was just about 1,200 if I remember the estimate right. So 11 bang, Ethan calculated up here. 6,400 rounds. Yeah, Todd, he said 1,200 is on the low side. I like to go on the low side because those seem to be the more accurate estimates. 6,400 rounds. So 400 warriors with 6,400 rounds. The entire 7th Cavalry if they were just with their carbines, 1 round each, 500 rounds.
Plus 6 rounds in their pistols.
Okay, so 500 times 7, that's 3,500 rounds. Yeah, that tells you.
Here's my thought on it.
And they found 2,000 spent cartridges. 2,000 semi-spent cartridges. That sounds normal. That's not about right then.
On the whole thing was less or a quarter of them have repeaters, right? A quarter, if you use the low estimate, a quarter of 1,200 is what? It's 200 or basically 300 almost.
300, yeah.
Now, there's obviously from the studies done in 1879 more Spencers than Winchesters by a long shot.
Yeah.
So let's half that. Now where are we at? Maybe 150. Yeah. Of actual lever action repeating fancy. I mean, the Spencer's a lever action too, but you also have to remember there's other repeaters out there too. So I honestly think, and I've seen this in several of the things I've read, especially in Frasca's book, the government estimated in 1879 there was less than 200 Winchester-derived rifles there. And I believe, Duke, you've put out that you thought there were 8 centerfire 73s there. Something to that.
Yeah, when they did the studies, they found fired guns. They know that there were 8 separate Winchester 73s fired at Little Bighorn.
And at least 3 of those are on Custer's side.
Yeah. So the way they did that is there's a great documentary on it. I think it was a PBS documentary. It's out there on YouTube if you look for it.
Mm-hmm.
They went and there's a big fire that come through there years ago, and they went out, did metal detecting, recovered bullets, recovered casings. Those casings they took, and they did the modern ballistics, what they do when they're looking at guns on the primer strikes, because every gun leaves a different primer strike, and that's true today, just as true as it was back then.
Mm-hmm.
And so they started doing ballistic testing on that, and they can track where every gun was fired, where it was fired at, whose side it was on, and if the gun was captured and used against the soldiers later on. Because like I said, Wooden Leg, he picked up a carbine, and there's a picture of him, and if Garrett, if you want to look it up at some point here during the thing, Wooden Leg picked up a carbine and used it against the soldiers. And he's got a picture of him, I think it's in the late 1890s, where he's standing there holding this carbine. So they are able to track, they know, they can give you an idea where a gun was at. And so through doing that, that's how they were able to determine there was 8 different Winchester 73s.
You know what's neat about that documentary too is they show it in the documentary, but I've heard they've done this quite often with guns that are. This gun was at the battlefield, and they've actually been able to match a gun to a cartridge and where the cartridge was found on the battlefield to know that gun was right there. That's pretty cool. Right,
when I got to Fort Laramie, there it is, right there.
Mm-hmm.
That's the carbine he picked up.
And he even has the correct sight. So yes, that's right.
Yep.
Yep. There are not very many of them with that sight left at that point. So yeah, that's right.
Right. Yeah. So it was right when I got to Fort Laramie. There was a big hubbub when I got up there because somebody had donated a gun to the battlefield up there and said it was Custer carbine, and they did the ballistic test and found out it was, in fact, on that battlefield. They were able to verify it was on that battlefield. So
it's incredible. I think it's the only battlefield you could actually go to and actually see where that weapon was at that exact time.
It's actually pretty easy. If nothing's been changed on the gun, it's pretty easy to verify that there aren't very many carbines out there in 76. And the ones that are in the Custers range are some of the very few that have no cleaning rod or clearing rod in the buttstock. No 3-piece cleaning rod in a trapdoor in the buttstock. So when you see that, even if it's a gun that's been redone or has been mixed parts over the years, when you see that trapdoor on the carbine without that trap area on it, you automatically know this is from pre-1877. So this is in 73, 74, 75, and some in 76. So that is interesting. I was looking at that gun. Those are the kind of things that set me up and set the nerd off in me. But I from the study, there's a big study that went on right after the Battle of Little Bighorn, right? Because the very first thing Livy Custer does is start blaming literally everybody except Custer.
Yep.
So we have a whole prong of attack against Reno. This is his fault. Whole prong of attack against Benteen. This is his fault. And another attack that actually worked, which was let's blame the guns.
Yep.
And that one worked for well over 100 years. that one hung in for a long time. And the thing was, I do believe that when they started actually looking into this, the government paid a huge amount of money. Every native you capture for the next 10 years that had anything to do with that fight, bring that weapon in that he has. Let's examine it. Could it possibly have helped? Could this be the case? Were we outgunned that badly? And what they found was, and this comes with the caveat of they didn't always turn the best gun in. Okay. But what they found was there was about 9 Lehman rifles to everything else. And a Lehman rifle is a muzzle-loading cap-lock rifle. And like I said, there's the caveat. Maybe they didn't turn the best guns in. But historically, that's the evidence. So when people, and I always see this on the History Channel, Custer, with his single-shot rifles, was slaughtered by a marauding band of natives completely armed with 1873 centerfire repeating Winchesters. No,
the way they make it, they definitely do make it sound like that, don't they?
He was defeated by a handful of Winchesters, and everybody's like, what about the 1860s? They only made 14,000 1860s to start with, and a lot of those didn't make it that far. A lot of them did, but not enough to arm 1,500 warriors. They had a lot of 66s, like Duke said, and they found a lot of 44 rimfire shells. And that's obviously 66s and a few handful of Henrys. But in reality, Custer got, I'm just going to say, he got outclassed to the point that he got mostly defeated by muzzle loaders and bows and arrows and war clubs. By the time the bows and arrows got in range, it was pretty well over. But would you agree, Duke?
Yeah, and yeah, it's just completely outnumbered because I'm having a brain fart here. I'm trying to think of how many he took up on top of the hill with him.
210.
Yeah, 210. Now, by that point, most of the warriors that had attacked Reno have left Reno.
Mm-hmm.
There's just a handful of warriors sticking back, kind of keeping an eye on them. Benteen's way the heck out in left field, quite literally way out in left field. And so that means, if we go with that low 1,200, and as Todd B pointed out, that estimate could be as high as 3,000 warriors. All that number, around 210 men. There ain't no amount of firepower for them soldiers that's going to save them in that instance. Because Custer, by the time that by the time he gets stopped up on the hill, he's completely surrounded. There's no getting out. There's no getting away. He could have had Gatling guns with him, and it wouldn't have made a damn bit of difference.
So my question to both you guys, and this is one I ponder a lot. Did we give too much credit to Custer for losing the battle? Should we not give more credit to the natives for winning the thing?
Oh, yeah, they definitely had him outfought and outclassed.
Yeah.
And even, they thought they'd lost the element of surprise. The natives knew the soldiers were there. They knew they were in the area. But they were not expecting him to show up right then. So Custer even had surprise on his side.
Yep.
It was just poor tactics, poor strategy. He tried to reuse the same strategy he'd used at the Washita. And at the Washita, it was one village.
Capture and escape, right?
Yeah. It was. They came in with complete surprise there at dawn. But at this village that Custer attacked, this is, I forget how many villages, but it's the entire alliance.
Mm-hmm.
Northern Cheyenne, Lakota, a handful of Arapaho, in this one area. Yeah, he was outnumbered, outclassed.
He attacked their version of the Union. So what do you think, Snapper? Any thoughts on that?
I couldn't agree more, honestly. That I really believe it's not that Custer lost that fight, it's because the Indians won that fight.
Yep.
I think so, and I don't think we give them enough credit because the first thing I always think of when you hear, well, Custer went in with terrible firearms and lost on account of the firearms he had, that's taking the credit away from Sitting Bull and these other guys that managed at a moment's notice to not only catch their ponies, mount their ponies, fend off two opposite attacks on both sides of the river, or the creek, right? And completely just annihilate the poor tactics that the cavalry had chosen to use that day.
And let's be honest too. If those guns had a horrible amount, like they're just so bad, whatever, why did they keep them for so much longer? You think that if there was a huge defect like that in the firearms,
so you're talking
bullet
about
jamming was not nearly as big a thing as it was played out.
What I wanted to do, because I've been studying it deeply right now, and what's funny is up until the 1950s, they thought 50% of Custer's guns had jammed, and they thought 50% of those trapdoors jammed up and caused Custer the fight. And that was another thing that was pushed by the Livy Custer campaign, the save his honor. The official, because there are broken knives, there are 45-70 cartridges, 45-55 technically, with dents where the cartridge was drug out. Now the story is 2% of roughly 200 guns. So,
as fast
like
as
two.
that battle was over on top of that hill,
yeah,
that 2% of the guns failed. guarantee you, it was 1, maybe 2 bullets.
Yep.
Those
Now,
soldiers
and
were able to fire off and have jammed.
yeah, and I think that's the case because there was a couple of books that were just terrible. What? Oh, I hate it. The Trapdoor in the Service by Colonel Philip Shockley of 18. The book was written in 1958, and he says there were 500 cartridges up there that had pocket knives marks on them. And people took that as gospel for a long time. And I was like,
and the thing of it is too with them copper cases, and I know they're copper alloy, but one of those things too is that the rims were notorious for tearing out.
mm-hmm.
So how much of it is a rim tore out from the extractor versus pocket knife went in there and pulled it out?
Yeah, they were notorious for case head separation at that point. And the funny thing is, in '77 they fix it because they go from the Bennett hammer and anvil to the, help me out, Duke. There's a second one that's still internally primed, but it's not the Bennett.
Oh, the Bayonet. Yeah,
the Bayonet. Why did I say Bennett?
Bayonet.
The Bayonet and the Bayonet, and I can't remember the next one, but they changed it.
Oh no, the internally primed one is the Bennett. It's Bennet is how it's. Yeah. Unless it is pronounced Bayonet.
Yeah,
I've just been pronouncing it wrong this whole time.
It's like mini ball is Meunier.
Yeah.
It's French. We got a lot of good guns from the French.
Yeah, okay. It just basically looks like a rimfire, but it's not a centerfire.
Yeah. And you can't. Hang on, give me 1 second here. I'm gonna go see if I've still got it.
Okay. Jeremy Gunslinger said, I got a chance to hold an OG Winchester style carbine with a 30 Winchester center fire is what he meant to say there, marking on it. Snapper, you ever held one of those?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, I've never got to play with a real Winchester before. Hopefully one day I will.
He's being sarcastic.
No, actually I have no experience with the 38s. I kind of want to. Like, there's a lot of calibers that, you always want to get the flagship calibers, 45, 4440, all that stuff. But it is also a lot of fun to play with the oddball calibers as well.
Yeah. And guys, we're going to move on to your questions a little quicker, I promise. Diane Houston has a great one. I'm going to wait for Duke because he needs to be involved in that conversation. Each one of these questions is a conversation all of its own. I'm sorry, guys.
Pretty much.
I'm looking for questions in here, guys. I appreciate all your comments. Custer was overconfident. Yeah, it was Jeremy Gunslinger. He was not only overconfident, he was under pressure. It was a case of this campaign is win or one and done if he lost, and it turned out to be one and done, and he lost. Yeah, Madras said he'd love to have you on, Duke. Looking for questions here because I know there's more. Yeah, White Bull with his 250 round cartridge belts and 16 he might have had in the rifle, Saboteur said. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, Indian Creek, and we already covered that. Did they have trouble with the copper cases sticking in their Springfields? Yes, they did, but not to the extent that it has been portrayed historically up until the last 20 years. People have really come to realize that maybe that wasn't quite as bad of an issue as they thought. And we've had this discussion too, haven't we, Snapper? Same exact.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, say that all again. I wasn't.
He's talking about the copper cartridges jamming in the Springfields. Same exact cartridges used it, and Duke can verify this. Same exact style of metal, even though it's 50-70, used at the wagon box fight in a worse extracting 1866 gun. That thing has a weaker extractor. And as Duke said, brand new cartridges, never been in leather, never corroded. They never jammed up in that fight particularly. Now that gun the 66 did have a weak extractor. But
I'd have to say though that does really have me convinced that it was more the corrosion than it was the actual case itself.
Earl Shiner said, don't forget, very good point. Don't forget the women and young men that were killing the wounded and scalping them and saving their wounded from battlefield. Yes. That is why so many of them died by arrows. It wasn't necessarily in the fight. It was after.
It's a whole family, it's a big old family get together. You got to have the women and children doing something too.
I thought I had a Bayonet primered case. I actually.
Oh, I have some I have one upstairs if you want me to get one for show and tell.
Yeah, go grab one.
Yep.
So these two, they came off of private piece of ground up by Fort Laramie. There was an old trading post there. I'm not going to say who it is, but a friend of mine owns it. And we found some 4570 cases, and he found one that was a bayonet primer. I forgot he's the one that found it. I got the other one. But these are the originals. They are copper.
And they're corroded.
They are heavily corroded. They've actually have corroded since I picked them up. They didn't come out of the ground this way. But these are, this one's 83, and I think this one's 88. And you can see the primer blew out of that one. This one's still got the primer in set. So after the little Bighorn, in the 1880s, I think it was in the 1880s, they started going to the reloadable primer. They'd went away from that bayonet primer system. Because most of these that are found that have this are 1880s later. I've never seen one with 70s. 70s ones are always the bayonet primer. And the only thing that tells them the difference between a rimfire when you first look at them, if they're fired, is that there's a dimple in the middle, but there's no primer pocket there because everything is inside here. So when they would load them, they'd put the priming compound down here in the case head, and then they'd slide that primer in, and then the bayonets were crimped around here to hold that anvil in. And that also proved to be a weak point too, because when these things that get corroded like this one is, if that one was fired as bayonet primer, there's a chance that head would tear off. And trust me, I've had experience with a black powder cartridge, a head tearing off of it. And that was in a 43 Spanish that I fired that blew back in my face. You want to see that video here on the channel.
I don't know anything about that. Okay, guys, I'm digging right here because I'm looking for the primer changes. Okay. I have the book as much as I didn't want to mess with it. I got it now. Where are the different primers? I'll bring it back to out of full screen here in just a second.
Anyway, while he's doing that, I'm going to read a couple of comments here. Wild West 89 said that I think Custer's big mistake was thinking they were running away like they did in most of his southern campaigns, let himself get spread out, and then realized too late. Definitely he got spread out. The idea was Reno was going to pull the warriors out to one side of the camp, and he's going to ride on the other side and capture the women and children, and then they would be willing to negotiate. He got spread out because he was trying to get to the end of the village. He didn't get to the end of the village. And by the time, because there was another comment I seen there of his big mistake is he didn't set up a defensive position. Well, when you're surrounded by warriors, you ain't got time to think about setting up a defensive position. He should have set that up long before he even went into the battle. But he didn't. And it's one of those things, once bullets start flying, you just sometimes don't have time to do what you should have done.
Yeah. Well, you know the old saying, sir, we're surrounded. Well, good. We have the enemy right where we want them.
So there's three different types of internally primed 4570.
Here you go. This is one of those bayonet primers. If you look, it's flat, and there's that little crimp he was talking about. This is an unfired 45 Colt. It's the later version, the one that this is the M1882 when they went to the Schofield length. So it's basically the short 45 Colt the military used, and it's copper, and like you can see again here, it's it looks rimfire. If I would have never known about these and not have picked this up, I would have 100% thought this was rimfire, but it's not. Matter of fact, I got a video on this bullet. I took it apart and actually see if any of the powder on the inside was still good, and it lit off like it was brand new. It's kind of funny. Well, it wasn't funny. It was actually pretty amazing.
So the first 58 centerfire or 50 caliber centerfire 5070s are Martin primed internal primer, and then next comes the bayonet primed, and that was actually carried over into the 4570. Then after the bayonet primer, which they changed after Little Bighorn in 77, they have the where did the other one go?
Isn't the
bar primed? Bar primed is number 3. And then in the 1880s, they go to boxer primed, which is what we know today. Right. It's outside, you can load it yourself. So that kind of covers that. All right. Let's see. That kind of covers the different. And the Martins and the Benet Prime, I call it Bennett just off the top of my head for some reason, but those are the ones that have the cutaway in the top of the case and the crimp in the top of the case in order to hold the anvil and the striking piece there. And those are the ones that had weaknesses, and the case head would come off I don't know how much of it happened at Little Bighorn, because obviously we don't know everything and we never will, but they did actually in 77 start issuing a tool that was a case extractor for when your case has no head. And so it was obviously a problem to an extent, but once again, that's the ammunition.
Right.
So Doug Dukes asked a question. He said, Frank Finkel, Little Bighorn survivor or fraud?
Yeah, that's one of those that his story is most believable, but he wasn't on Custer Hill. And there were survivors of Little Bighorn. Benteen survived. Good chunk of Reno's men survived. Finkel's claim says that he was shot early on and his horse wandered off. He was knocked unconscious, which makes it a little bit more believable because he's not claiming glory like some of the other fakes. But it's one of those that it's really hard to say it's more believable than the others, but I'm not 100% sold on it.
A question, Diane.
Wouldn't his name be in the roster, like for?
Oh, he claimed he changed his name, which soldiers did do that. They'd enlist under a false name because there are soldiers that if they got stationed at a fort, they didn't they didn't like the fort they were at. They could
go AWOL and nobody would know who they are.
Go turn themselves in at another post, and they had to serve the rest of their enlistment out. But instead of being sent back to their unit, well, then they would just put them in the unit at another post somewhere else. So that happened quite a bit. Some of them would enlist back east just for a free ticket to get out west. And as soon as they get out west, gone.
Sayonara.
So, if Finkel did that, he probably changed his name somewhere along the lines, because if he got discovered, he could still be face punishment, because he'd have to go back and serve out the time that he enlisted for, whatever was left. And once you deserted, a lot of times when you finished out that enlistment, you finished it out with a ball and chain around your ankles. You were in the guardhouse the rest of the time you were an enlisted man.
So I want to go back before we head down. This is a question Diane Houston asked quite a while ago, and I was waiting until you got back. This is a very important question. Once again, it has a lot to do with the Livy Custer honor campaign, as I call it, after the battle. She had a whole war all of her own. Mm-hmm. But the question is, do you think some of the 7th Cavalry would have survived if Benteen helped instead of holding back? I think Benteen left Custer high and dry.
By the time Benteen arrived, and there's no doubt there was definitely animosity between Reno. That's why Custer sent them out away. He sends Benteen out because Benteen's a real pain in the butt. He sends Reno down to attack the village because Reno's going to get hit the hardest. Basically, he wanted them out on the sideline so he could take all the glory.
Here's the thing, and I'll say this. It
makes sense because the rest of his commanders that he had were ones that, with the exception of Captain Weir, that went with Benteen. All the rest of them were Custer men. They were the part of the Custer clan, if you will.
That leads to a whole different thing that a lot of people don't talk about, and I wanted you to touch on this while you're talking about it. The amount of political pressure Custer was under to have the glory. It's not necessarily he has to have the glory for no reason. This is one and done. If he doesn't make this campaign successful, Grant is going to hang him out to dry over some things that went on with traders and post-settlers. Of all things before that, there was huge political pressure on. If Custer doesn't make the glorious battle here, he's going to fade off into, if not wind up in jail, he's going to fade off into obscurity pretty quickly. Would you agree, Duke?
Yeah, and he had big political ideas.
He did. He wanted to be president.
Yep. But yeah, there was definitely a lot of unit politics, other politics involved, and Custer was a glory hole.
Yeah, that's and that's funny because you don't hear a lot about that on the native side, where you have two major leaders and one of them always gets more credit than the other. Well, it's kind of changed around nowadays, but in the 1920s, 30s, or 40s, it was Setting Bull won this, and nowadays we say, well, there's a little more Crazy Horse involved than we give him credit for. But was there political strife between those two ever in their tribes?
I'm sure there was to some point, but not to the extent that. And then there was some big politics between Red Cloud and Crazy Horse for sure.
Oh yeah.
But not so much with them because they all had the same idea. We aren't going to go live on the reservation. We are not going to do what these white men want us to do. We're going to live the way we've lived, and anybody tries to change that, we're going to fight. And so, Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull were very much on that line of thinking.
Yeah.
And Sitting Bull was definitely the big leader.
Yeah.
So you could say Sitting Bull is kind of the, I don't want to put it, kind of the overall leader, whereas Crazy Horse is more of the battle leader.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So
say that Sitting Bull was not a warrior. He was a well-known warrior and well-proven warrior.
He was more of a general, though, in a lot of cases.
Yeah, you could say it is that Sitting Bull's kind of the head man of everything, and Crazy Horse is his right-hand man in some respects.
Okay. But getting back to the Benteen question, like Bush said, Benteen barely saved his command, plus he was in shock. Benteen went through parts of the Civil War, right?
Yeah.
And he wrote that he had never seen a cloud of smoke during the entire Civil War like he saw on the hill that day. And that's because they didn't have repeating arms and not even repeating arms, but cartridge-fed guns that were breech-loaded, cartridge-fed. You're talking thousands of rounds going off in, as Duke so eloquently puts it, the time it takes a hungry man to eat a meal, right?
Yep.
And you're talking, you wouldn't believe the cloud of smoke that he sees coming up. Now, Benteen did not ask to be sent away. Benteen, I believe from everything I've read, thought that was foolish, right? At least he claims that now. He claims that, which he could have, nobody knows what was said exactly, probably. But I think that Benteen was probably the smartest and most, whatever you think of him later, he's got some definite issues later on, especially. But I think that day he was the smartest, most capable commander because Reno froze, got a lot of people killed.
Yep.
Custer got wiped out. Benteen digs in away from the hornet's nest, way back here. It's like running away from a bunch of bees, You're not going to get right up there. And when he saw that cloud of smoke, I think he knew we camp here.
I have something to add to this when you're done, Garrett.
Go ahead. I'm done.
So one of the biggest parts for me that I believe Benteen actually did the right thing. And that's because if anybody has ever been in any command position in the military, they'll tell you that your first responsibility is the mission and also your men. If you're already in a situation where you're losing, planning was not done properly. We don't fight fair. We never do. And I could see them getting stuck in a situation where they did that, right? But at the same time, why are you going to risk your entire command, all of your men, to save these guys over here that you can't save? You're not going to be able to save them. You're just going to get wiped out as well. And this still even applies to this day. Everybody thinks, if you leave somebody over there, you're not going from you're a coward. It doesn't work that way. As a matter of fact, there's been many times I've seen people kill or die because we couldn't get a helicopter in to come get them because it's too hot. We're not going to risk a helicopter. You're going to kill more people to try to get this one person out. If you can't drive them out, sucks to be that guy. It's always that way. It's about everybody else. It's not about just one little group or a bunch of group. Now, don't get me wrong. We go after every single thing we can, but at the same time, he would have done nothing but get him and his men killed. That's it.
What's that saying the Army has? Dead bodies attract more dead bodies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
To be fair,
So it's not a cowardice thing. I don't see it as cowardice anyway at all. I actually think he did exactly what he should have done as an officer. Is you realize the mission's failed, protect your men, get your men out of there.
Benteen and Reno actually, and Reno, of course, he was drunk and fell apart, as Garrett said. They actually proved themselves to be the better leaders than Custer. They weren't
even though Reno froze, he got some guys out of there.
Yeah,
Yep.
He goes
Here's
into
the
shell
thing.
shock there in the middle of things, but then he finally says, "We got to get out of here."
And here's
But
the
let's
thing.
be honest too. I could never call a man like that a coward because I've never been in that situation.
Yeah.
No, anybody. If you've
Also
never been in that
positioned-
situation, you don't know how you're going to act.
He
You just
positioned
don't.
his men in cover.
Mm-hmm.
Big. Whatever you think of the battle, whatever side you're on, you have to feel sorry for those 200 guys on that hill. There's
Definitely.
After the horses have grazed that huge village of, some people say, counting everybody, some people say 10,000, some natives say that. No, that's not counting warriors, that's counting women, children, the whole thing. They've grazed that entire area to a nubbin. There's not a blade of grass you can hide behind on that hill.
Yep.
You can hide
I
behind
felt really bad for the men who did survive that too. Because could you imagine not being able to, what's happening, and you can't do anything about it. No matter what you do, you can't do anything about it. It would have been easier to be on the dying side than to watch it happen and know you couldn't do anything about it.
Right.
Yeah.
I think those guys probably ended up with the most traumatic part of it is surviving it.
Yeah.
But one thing I noticed in there that the comments come up about, Custer needed to set up a defensive position. Like I said earlier, Custer at that point did not have time to set up a defensive position because they were going on a dead run trying to get away. When they found out they were surrounded, that's when they started to set up. They didn't have time to dig rifle pits. And so I said, well, Benteen and Reno did.
They were a
Reno
long way
at
away.
this point was no longer engaged. Reno has fallen back.
Mhm.
Benteen has not been engaged. He comes up on Reno, then he starts to dig pits. He's not been engaged. By the time he's digging his rifle pits and have rifle pits dug, Custer is dead.
Mhm.
So he had plenty of time to set up a defensive position. Custer didn't.
And that was the right thing to do. That's the right thing to do.
That gets me to the question, Duke. How do you honestly, because if you study this, obviously there's nobody from Last Stand Hill telling this story.
No.
And the natives have so many different versions. One guy's like, it's like a full all-out day battle of 500-yard range shooting. And one guy says, like Duke said, it takes as long as a hungry man to eat a meal. The true estimates seem to come in around 20 minutes. And that's including the women and the young ones going in there clubbing and killing everybody. So maybe 10 minutes of battle. What do you think happened?
It all fell apart so fast. Nobody had time to do much anything.
Yeah.
And looking at the route, look at how they were routed. You could tell that it was chaos. 100% chaos.
Custer was in a full route.
Yeah.
He was in full route. Reno was in full route. The only thing that Reno, the reason his men were saved and were able, like I said, to get to defensive position is the Indians saw Reno running and they said, okay, we've got another group over here. Boom. They leave him. They take off.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a great account by William Jackson, Billy Jackson, he was also called. He was one of the scouts and interpreters that had been hired. He was with Reno. And he basically says, they attacked, they came in, they swarmed. And he's one of the few that didn't get out with Reno. They actually hid in a bunch of bushes with him and 3 other guys, hid in a bunch of bushes. And then they sit there and watched. And the warriors left. The women came in, took care of those that weren't dead yet, were taking off arms and ammunition from the soldiers. And then they started heading off to take all those arms and ammunition to the others that were up on Last Stand Hill. But yeah, Custer was routed. He did not have any time to set up any kind of defensive position. Because it's like run. Oh crap, we can't run anymore. We've got them in front. We got them on the sides. We got them behind.
What are you going to do?
Form a skirmish line, start shooting. And you're in. Benteen and Reno are sitting back there and they're like, well, we got time to dig in.
Yep.
That's
as a matter of fact, we should probably look at is that Custer's sacrifice of that happening saved the lives of the other men because at least they were still occupied on
And the other
Custer's side.
reason why Benteen and Reno weren't wiped out is because at this point, the natives are not there to wipe them out. Their tactic is we're going to keep them pinned.
Yep.
While the rest of the village gets the heck out of there.
This is where Custer, in my mind, the biggest mistake he made that day. He went, it was a mama bear and her cubs, and he got between them. Whereas Benteen and Reno, far enough back, they're not that big of a threat. And when you get between warriors and their families like that, and just bear in mind, Washita is living in these natives' minds. So it's like they know if they lose, there's drastic consequences that direction too. A lot of people don't think about that. If the Indians lost that day, what do you think, Duke? What would have happened? Duke's gone.
Your mic's off, Duke, just in case you're trying to talk.
He'll be back. Okay.
Not start until I heard they were attacked overnight. Wild West Extravaganza, like apparently they were hit at like 2:00 in the morning.
Yeah, Todd B.
It stopped, and then
when we say 210 men, Todd B, we're talking about the group with Custer because Todd B says not 210 on Custer Hill, 40 bodies recovered at Custer Hill. Most of Custer battalion is spread out between Custer Hill and Calhoun Hill. When we say Hill, we're talking about that group, okay?
All of it.
That group.
Yeah, the 210 is everything from the Cooley. God, I'm having a brain fart here.
Yeah, Calhoun Hill. Sorry.
Yeah, it's strung out because there's groups getting picked off. So yeah, by the time they get to Custer Hill, there's not a lot of men left. But the detachment that Custer took with him, he started out with 210.
Yeah, and it's kind of like when you're talking about San Juan Hill. Of course, we know that's Kettle Hill, a lot of it, but it's just easier to say San Juan Hill.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So
and then and I apologize stepping out. I had to run to the bathroom really bad.
Okay. I had a question for you, but I don't remember what it was.
Oh, I was just going to answer Wild West Extravaganza.
The one for I think that's what it was.
Hi, Josh.
Yeah.
Hi, Josh.
Thanks for the email. I haven't got a chance to read it yet.
Yeah, and I was going to send you an email here too. I just haven't done it yet. So yeah, Reno and Benteen, they weren't really attacked, but they were harassed overnight. The natives did have warriors kind of stationed out watching, and they'd throw some pot shots in there too. But they were basically just making sure that they were staying right there. Because if you read Frank Gruard's, and this is where things get confusing at the Little Bighorn when you start talking about the scouts, because you got Frank Gruard that shows up kind of in the middle of the night. And then you got Frank Gerard, who was one of the scouts with the Reno outfit. And Billy Jackson does not do a good job of distinguishing which one's which when he's talking about it. But Frank Gerard, when he rides in middle of the night, says he runs into a Lakota man, and he starts speaking to him, and that Lakota man recognized his voice because Frank Gruard had lived with Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull for a number of years. But yeah, he said there were pickets, if you will, all through the night. Billy Jackson, they get back to Reno that night, the next morning. They were dodging pickets, lookouts, all through the night, trying to get back to them. As funny as one story is that Frederick Francis Gerard that was with him, when they went to cross the Little Bighorn River, he couldn't swim, and so as kind of a I guess you could say a superstition to make sure he got across the river alive, took out his really expensive pocket watch and threw it in the river as kind of a good luck charm to get across, and then stepped in the river and never got over ankle deep as he went across. But with the first place they tried to cross, the one horse they had went in and went over its head. So that was one of those. He's like, yeah, we got to get across this river. But yeah, it was kind of a funny story out of that one. But yeah, it was all a mess.
So wanted to address this, Duke, because I've read on this a lot since you got me into this, and I have started reading this account so many different ways. And Todd B and Madras Arsenal are both kind of debating this a little bit. Did they just cut a finger off of Custer, and so everybody knew who he was, or was he completely unrecognizable? Now, I've read all of these accounts, right? And it seems like the finger account is starting to outweigh the unrecognizable account.
So it was kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Because Custer had cut his hair.
Mm-hmm.
And he was known as long hair. So he'd cut his hair. The Indians had no idea this was Custer attacking them when they fought him. They just knew it was the soldiers. That's all they knew. There were those after the fight that did recognize him. There was a finger that was taken. Supposedly, the Cheyenne women, when they went to mutilate his body, told the warrior that was going to cut the finger off, don't cut his finger off, don't mutilate him, or don't cut off his arm, I think is what he was going to do. And the warrior wound up taking the finger. The women did punch holes in his ears with their sewing alls. But that was the extent of what they did to Custer. But in general, the soldiers that were there were not mutilated like they were at the Fetterman fight. There were scalps taken.
We had Benteen and we still had Benteen and Reno and an entire army on its way.
Yeah. And the other thing is that Sitting Bull in one of his visions had seen that the soldiers had not been molested. And so he told them, do not molest these soldiers because in his vision, they weren't molested. So yeah, there were some scalps taken, but for the most part, they were not mutilated like what had been done at Fetterman.
Okay.
Trying to think what else. They did take Custer's coat. I forget which man it was that got his coat. Another one got a revolver. And that was the other thing. Is Sitting Bull says don't loot the soldiers, but they did loot them for arms and ammunition. A lot of the Lakota say that they did not take anything off of the soldiers. They didn't mutilate the soldiers. And those that did do that was mostly the Cheyenne that took a lot of the arms and ammunition. Trying to think.
So there's one other thing that's come to light more recently, as a matter of fact, in the last couple of years, that might shed some light on this native identification of Custer. The story of Custer's revolver, which one of them, I believe, has been confirmed, was taken from his coat pocket, right?
Mm-hmm.
By a native who kept it, and it sold at auction recently, and they seem to have confirmed that this was the gun.
Supposedly. Right. There's still a lot of conjecture of whether it is. The other gun was taken by a native, and he felt bad about it. And the story goes is that he went to Sitting Bull, and they did a little ritual and buried the gun back on the battlefield after the fact. Or somewhere in the vicinity of the battlefield. But that gun was supposedly buried because he was afraid that it was going to bring bad medicine back on the people.
Wouldn't that just be one heck of a find? Man, I'm sure there's nothing left of it, but still.
Now it'd be a rust bucket.
Yeah. Madras Arsenal has a question. Have we come across any accounts describing war clubs being used?
Oh, war clubs were certainly used. That was one of the primary weapons. So it was a war club or a tomahawk. Most warriors had some form of club, tomahawk. They had a knife, bow and arrow. That was pretty standard.
The wounds described on the bodies afterwards by, was it Terry? Definitely describes war club crushing blows to the head.
Yeah.
And it's not like there was a lot of rocks to pick up and use. I mean, there was some, but it's not like this is kind of a grassy hill.
But yeah, the skull crackers, it was called. That was a fairly prominent weapon. But if you want a good source on the native accounts, this one is really good here. And I'm going to try to find the one here on the native that supposedly killed Custer. I think that's in here. I need to look for it. I think it's in here. I'm not sure if it is. But the warrior that killed Custer supposedly claims that when he killed him, he did not know it was Custer. He was told after the man was dead, after the fight was over. It was. Give me a minute here. Go ahead and read comments.
Okay, I was just going to say Todd B put up a good point. He said Benteen and Reno set up defensive positions and survived, then repelled multiple attacks over 2 days.
Yeah, but keep in mind, too, is that they did not face what Custer faced on him.
No, but I think because Madras was asking, he said he thought that if Benteen and Reno had carried out their duties, some of them might have survived. You're going to charge onto a hill with zero cover, even if everybody's there. What is it, 550 some guys all together, something like that, Duke?
What's that?
He is like
just 550
guys all together, right?
Yeah, something like that.
You're
still going to be outnumbered 3, 4.
All it would have done was a lot more death. Yeah, it wouldn't have done anything.
You can't. You got to remember, this is not just counting the warriors. When you go into that village, you're fighting everybody. You're fighting the warriors, the squaws, the children, the dogs. Could you imagine the mess if Reno had actually got into that village on one side and Custer had got into that village on the other? It would have just been over quicker.
Yeah.
And had Benteen come in at the last minute, guess what? Benteen had a group of guys that did. A lot of people don't talk about this. What's his name, Duke? Broke away, abandoned Benteen under orders, and went to help Custer.
Oh, Captain Weir.
Captain Weir. And what happened to him?
He got turned back right away.
When he got around the hill and seen what was going on up there, that's it.
No need to carry on.
Yep.
Yeah. You already know what's going to happen. You already know the outcome. It's going to be very plain to see.
Yeah. And I don't remember how many men he took with him, but it was a decent number. And they realized once they got there, no way. Why does everybody have to die in this situation? And that's what would have happened. That's what would happen. And I hate this when we. Not your comment, Madras. That's a good thought actually. But what I hate is when we look at this like they were so stupid. They rode into these, and these Indians were just waiting for them, and it was so easy. No. Those warriors were fighting for their families' lives.
Yep.
What would have happened, Duke? I was going to ask you earlier. You weren't here. What would have happened had, by some miracle, Custer won that day? What do you think happens to the village?
It would have definitely been torn apart.
How many women and children do you think get killed in that situation?
That'd have been a lot.
And I'm not saying that just because of political views or anything. We have historic evidence on both sides. That's just how war was fought. It's terrible.
And it's one of those things that there's so many variables. You know, if Crick hadn't have turned around and went on a fishing trip for 2 weeks, maybe it wouldn't happen, because Crick actually was within a day's march of that village when he was attacked on the Rosebud. In fact, he was at where the spot where the camp was at just a few days prior. That's why he was attacked. They knew he was close. Mm-hmm. And they attacked him, 30 miles away from the village, and they held him up for, 6 hours. He used up over half of his ammunition. That's the whole reason he turned back, is he was afraid that if he got attacked again, he couldn't fend off another attack. If Crick hadn't turned back, if he'd have kept pushing, he might have got there before Custer did. That might have changed the whole outcome. Terry and Gibbon were 1 day behind, or 2 days behind Custer. So what it really comes down to is if Custer would have been patient and waited, or strategically fallen back away from the village and waited for reinforcements, that battle would have been done like that, and it would have been a totally different outcome.
To Todd B's point earlier of Custer should have set up a defensive position, he should have. at 6 o'clock that morning when his scouts told him they know where we're at.
Yep.
That's when you set up a defensive position.
The night before when they told him,
yeah, the night
not
before.
go out to that village, there's more Indians than you can handle.
So when did they see the native scouts rummaging through the dropped food box on the trail?
That was the next day, the day of the attack, if I remember right.
Yeah, that was in the morning.
Yeah.
So here's the whole point. Here's the whole trick of the matter right here. Whether you believe that he was outgunned by Winchesters or not, whether you believe that Reno and Benteen didn't help him out enough or not, Custer would have been alive for another 20 years if when Frank Gerard, Lonesome Charlie Reynolds, his native scouts all came in and told him in that morning, they know where we're at, and they outnumber us 10-1.
Yep.
He stops and digs in.
Yeah, because Charlie Reynolds, and it was not Frank Gerard, it was
Gerard. Sorry.
Because yeah, that's where that confusion comes in. You got two guys with very similar names. They'd all told him the night before because the night before they had found several trails. Each trail was average about 300 feet wide. That tells you that there's several hundred people traveling in each group. They told him, you're outnumbered. And Custer's reply is, there's no force that can defeat the 7th Cavalry.
And here, that's what I was saying. No matter what you say later, Guns, Benteen, Reno, at that moment, Custer can save everybody in this command. Well, at least most of them. Because you know what's going to happen? Those scouts are going to go back to them. They're going to say, hey, here comes the army. You know what they're going to do? They're going to take off for Canada. Yep. Right? Exactly what they're going to do. And that right there, no matter what you think of anything else in the fight, Custer had the information. He had the knowledge. He had a good position. He could have had time to dig in and defend, and he did not do it. Gatling guns, Terry, all that aside, huge mistake to go against all the information given you by your scouts.
And if Custer had taken the Gatling guns, he would have survived because they'd have slowed it down enough. He'd have never got to the village in time to have done anything.
Yep. Todd B said, yes, Garrett, that's what I meant. Beecher Island 50 versus 1,000, Forsyth won. I would argue that at Beecher's Island, Forsyth survived.
Yeah, they survived. Yeah.
I wouldn't know if I would say they won, but yeah, it's a good point you got there.
The big thing that saved them at Beecher Island is they killed Roman Nose.
Yeah.
Because
nobody knows exactly when.
When the leader gets killed, that's big medicine, as they'd say. So, say if Custer's men would have got lucky and picked off Crazy Horse, that might have turned around.
Madras says Custer's orders from Terry were vague and gave Custer a lot of freedom to make his own decisions.
Yes, they were. And Terry was a great administrator because the way he wrote those orders, he came out shining either way.
He knew how to create deniability.
Indeed.
He set it up. So, and Crook did the same thing at the Reynolds fight earlier in the year. Let Reynolds lead that attack and had it set up to where if Reynolds wins, Crook looks good. If Reynolds loses, Reynolds looks bad.
Yeah. And to all that point, though, like I just said, there was one moment that day when Custer could have turned it all around. He wouldn't have won, but he would have saved his guys.
Yep.
And he didn't do it. With Terry there or not, Gatling guns there or not, all that doesn't matter. Because there's one major flaw made by a general that got a lot of people killed.
I also think he really underestimated.
Colonel.
Lieutenant Colonel.
Go ahead, Snapper.
I really think he way underestimated the fighting will of the people there.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that's
why you never underestimate your enemy, ever.
The natives had proven their will to fight that week before when they hit Crook.
Rosebud.
Yeah.
Where do you think they got all those trap doors they had on that hill?
Well, actually, they didn't get that many because there was only 10 killed on either side. And that it was actually kind of an even break. The natives actually were successful at Rosebud because they turned Crook around and made him go the other way. But if you go by body count, it's even. There was 10 warriors killed, 10 soldiers killed. in 6 hours of combat. So that's why I say when the Little Bighorn is kind of an unusual battle, because there were so many soldiers that were killed.
Mm-hmm.
And that was in a short time. And yeah, like a week before when they hit Crook, 6 hours. 6 hours, and each side killed 10 people. But that right there shows you the fighting will, because these natives came out. They found out Crook was there. They hit him hard.
Mm-hmm.
They hit him just as hard as they hit Custer. But Crook had more men.
Crook had cover.
The big advantage that Crook had is that he'd put the Shoshone and the Crow Scouts out on his flanks. And if I remember right, it was the Shoshone Scouts got hit first. They were the first ones attacked. They knew the attack was coming. Crook had time to deploy his men. And Crook had infantry and cavalry. It was about an even mix. They got attacked in the morning, so everybody's all gathered up.
Mm-hmm.
So it was because when Crook was marching, the infantry was taken off early in the morning, and the cavalry didn't leave camp until like 10 o'clock in the morning, because otherwise they completely outrun the infantry. But yeah, Crook, even though Crook kind of tucked tail and ran, which, and you look at the situation, you can't blame him. He had a more tenable position. He had more men. And he wasn't out for glory. He kept his cool. The big thing that killed Custer was glory.
I would say that and a dose of political pressure to make him get the glory.
And Custer got his glory because Custer has been, talked about ever since.
Supposing he digs in, survives, do we know who he is today, most of us?
Maybe, maybe not.
Josh was not here earlier, and we already answered this question once, but he asked, any thoughts on Frank Finkel?
Yeah, it's one of those. It's I can't 100% buy it. I don't think it's as bad as Bushy Brill Roberts.
liar.
But it's one of those that he knows some things that were not known at the time that make it believable. He's not claiming glory like a lot of the fake stories were claiming at that time period. So yeah, it's kind of one of those. I don't 100% buy it, but I'm not going to completely sweep it off the table either.
Yeah. Ethan asked from 11 Bang Bang. Here's a question, and I'm going to reword it a little bit. He said, what would happen if Custer would have not stopped on that hill? Okay, would have not stopped on that hill and would have hightailed it to Benteen. He was already surrounded.
Yeah, he was already surrounded, but if he could have got back to Benteen probably would have taken a major losses because they wouldn't have had time to dig in. It would have been a full route.
And something else. And something else I'd have to ask. I've heard this before. I can't confirm it, but Custer's horse's condition seems to be called into question in this run too.
Yeah, because they've been marching. They had been marching hard for days. The native horses, which the native horses are always more fleet than what the cavalry had anyway. Their horses, they engaged Crook the week before. They've had plenty of time to recuperate, recover. I think what would have happened is that, Custer might have come out of it alive, but he'd still lost a good chunk of his men, even if he was able to run.
And bear in mind, this is going to be controversial. We don't know that there was as much of a last stand there as has always been portrayed by everybody. Once again, the Livy Honor campaign.
It could also be the fact
they were moving away the whole time trying to get back to Benteen.
You know what I actually feel happened there?
What, Snapper?
Say that again. Go ahead, dude. Say that again.
I was going to say the only reason it was the last stand is because they didn't have anywhere else to go.
Exactly.
That, plus I guarantee you at that time they had so many casualties that they couldn't run.
Yep.
You're stuck.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could always turn around and stop, but you don't have enough men to guard your retreat. You always kind of want to retreat backwards while bounding, so somebody can run, and then while somebody else is turned around and shooting, so you can actually escape. If you just turn around and run, they're just going to cut you down. And they didn't have enough men to do that. I guarantee you that's why. They didn't have enough men to do that. And if you took off and ran, you would be one of those people that's probably still missing in the deep ravine.
Yeah. And it's also this myth of this huge battle. And even some of the natives have said this, but if you look at even Benteen and Reno, those guys knew when it was over on Custer Hill, Calhoun Hill, all that. They knew when that whole area was over because the shooting stopped. And do you know in a moment like that how fast 20 minutes goes by?
It's going to seem like forever and go by fast.
Yep. I've fought some fires before. I never fought people. I know Snapper has. But in a moment like that, do you know how fast an hour goes by when that kind of tension is on, let alone 20 minutes?
Oh, it's years. It feels like years.
Oh,
you feel like your entire life has changed so much that it seems like another lifetime.
Yes, but for me, it actually feels like seconds when I'm in that kind of a situation and time is of the essence. 20 minutes has gone by in 5 minutes because I haven't had time to think. I have to think about things, you know. So Madras Arsenal said if Custer had dug in the night before, that would have given the natives a chance to escape, and that would have been mission failure. Yes and no. Yes and no. Not necessarily, because there's a big army coming. Right, Duke? Would you say so?
Say that again?
If Custer had dug in the night before, that would have given the natives a chance to escape, and that would have been mission failure.
Yeah.
You think it would have been? I think that
I don't think it would have been mission failure because Custer's mission was to find the camp. It was not to engage it.
That is
the
true.
Engaging
And also,
part was if he found it viable.
Also, that camp would have broken up into smaller camps immediately. There's no way a village that big can travel together to Canada. There's not enough water. No. There's not enough
that's
grass.
Exactly what they did. They broke up after that.
Yeah.
That's why by the time Terry and all them get there, Crick gets there, it's not until August that they even really engage again.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when Crook just happens to stumble on American Horses Village.
And Custer has one guy there for one main reason. A little Peloponnesian guy, however you want to call him, that can identify Sitting Bull on site easily. And he knows which camp Sitting Bull's going with. And when it breaks up, Custer, Terry, and the whole group get Sitting Bull, I think.
Well, the thing is, that little Polynesian guy was actually with Crook.
Yeah, but he at the same time, he's got scouts that can identify Sitting Bull.
Yeah.
And they not only identify Sitting Bull, they know which group he's going with. They get Sitting Bull. They don't have to capture everybody.
No.
They get Sitting Bull. They win in their mind, politically. Right?
Let's say if they did make it to Canada, would it then matter? Because you're basically fighting for the land. If you ran them out of the territory.
A lot of them did make it to Canada. A lot of them went
Sitting
to Canada.
Bull made it to Canada, and then troops were put on the border to make sure he didn't come back.
Yeah.
So I would say that had he dug in the night before and that big village broke up, because it's impossible for that village to travel together. The only reason that village is together is a crazy set of circumstances that should not happen. When they break up, he gets Sitting Bull, I think. They go after Sitting Bull. They don't care about Crazy Horse. They don't care about 10,000 women and children. They want Sitting Bull. And when they have him, it's over.
Well, definitely, yeah. They're going to go after Sitting Bull. They're going to go after Crazy Horse because those are the two big leaders. But Sitting Bull's kind of the number one. And that's kind of what the Reynolds campaign was. They were really trying to find Crazy Horse.
Yeah.
And Sitting Bull was quite a bit further up north. I forget where he was at, but Frank Gerard basically told Crook that, Crazy Horse will be on the Powder River. And they went to the village, and Gerard looks down there and says, yeah, that's Crazy Horse's personal animal right there. Well, it was his animal, but somebody had borrowed it to come down to visit that village, and Crazy Horse was actually 20 miles down the river.
But, yeah, I honestly think, I haven't thought about it before, but had he dug in that night, I think they're successful in at least one major mission accomplishment.
Probably would have survived.
That's the big one, yeah. But I think they still win because I think they get Sitting Bull. I really do.
And at that point, Terry and Gibbon would have been coming down Little Bighorn. If Crook hadn't turned around, he'd been coming up behind him. Custer had come in on the side. They'd had him encircled at that point.
Mm-hmm.
If Custer would have pulled back.
Doug Dukes makes a good point. Custer got his glory thanks to Libby.
Yeah.
She was more of a, she could have been president probably before him.
I seen another comment up there about kind of referring to Custer to defend San as on the Battles of Rourke Drift with 135 against 4,000. Do you see there's a common theme with those that survive? They've got time to set up a defense.
Cover.
Once Custer come on that village, he had no time.
And
if he wanted to set up a defensive position, he should have done it while Reno was being engaged, because after Reno was routed, he had no time.
That's another thing. He didn't have to lead those guys down that hill. What if he sits on the hill with a spyglass and actually studies the situation for 10 minutes?
Yeah.
Just 10 minutes.
And here's the other thing, too, kind of thinking about it. That country up there, we've discussed this earlier about digging through hardpan, digging through sod. The whole little fight is about 20 minutes in length. You are not going to dig a rifle pit that's going to be very valuable in less than 20 minutes. Benteen managed to do it, but after they repulse that attack that follows in Captain Weir, they're sitting there. They've got time. They've got men digging while men are firing. And once again, they are not getting the full brunt of the attack either. That was a big reason they were able to get their defensive position put in.
Yeah, Jay Septic Hunter says, I remember, we already covered this earlier in the chat, but I remember hearing a while back that trapdoor carbines caused Custer's troop jams because the guns got too hot. Was that even true? We covered this a little bit ago. Right now, the estimated number is 2% of the guns used were jammed, so you're a very minuscule number.
So figure 500, the number that Custer took with him. 500 times 0.02%.
Well, it would be 2%, not 0.2.
I did that. Well, 0.02 is 2%.
Yeah, 0.02.
0.02, okay.
So that means 10 guns jammed. With
and that's counting Benteen, Reno.
No, that's just the group that Custer took. That's not Benteen, Reno. Or wait, yeah, that would be,
yeah, because Custer took 200.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So 10 guns in that whole engagement jammed.
At least on the.
Those were the 10 most important guns. Didn't you know that?
And then you also got to take into account soldiers at this time. They don't care if soldiers can hit a target at 100 yards.
You get 20 rounds a year.
Yeah.
And that's most of those rounds people blast aimlessly at deer.
Yep. And in training, you get three rounds. That's target practice. What they wanted is still back to the old Civil War tactics, is to be able to fling a wall of lead at the enemy because somebody's going to hit something. And there's an account of soldiers in one battle, I forget which one it was, where the soldiers over here flipping the door up, putting around in, closing the door, flipping the door out, putting another one in, closing it. He wasn't even firing.
Yeah, that's a thing. Yes.
And it's kind of like
they found all those rifles at Gettysburg.
Yeah, that had 9 bullets stuck down the barrel of his musket.
To that point, Benteen made or at least one of Benteen's men, his officers, made a point of the fact that he watched a couple of troops at where they were dug in when the natives come upon them. Watches a couple of troops get so shook they don't load bullets. They open it up, they close it, they dry fire. They do that 3 or 4 times, and what his takeaway was, the barrel of the gun was in the dirt every time they pulled the trigger. They're flinching it that hard. And that was a big thing that went into the reports on, we're going to change our marksmanship programs. And boy, do they change their marksmanship programs.
Yeah.
Buffington gets in there. We're talking, you have to hit a man at 600 yards, supposedly. I can't even see a man at 600 yards, probably.
It took the 1876 campaign, the combination of Little Bighorn and Rosebud, because, like I said, Crook burned up over half of his ammunition at Rosebud for 1,400 men. That is not an insignificant amount of ammunition for 10 natives killed.
Yeah. And Madras, who was over here the other day, and he was looking at how crazy that Buffington site was on that trapdoor where they account for the rifling spin. That's
Right.
all because of the reports of the poor marksmanship coming from the Battle of Little Bighorn.
So the whole Army marksmanship program does not come in until 1884.
Yeah.
And that is...
Well, I mean, it was there by 79 because that's when they were really picking up that 500 grain bullet trying to improve the ballistics at Sandy Hook. But something that Shah Shula points this out, during Buffington's time, they took into account the humidity in the room when the ammunition was loaded to determine how far that ammunition would go before it dropped. That's how crazy we went the other direction. They put this computer of a sight on the rifle that nobody knows how to use. Still cool, but nobody knew how to use it. But yeah, they definitely changed a lot of things after that.
That's kind of like giving an M203 Grenadier a Mark 21
Sights.
Sniper.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly what it was when
then
they
telling him
Actually, you know what?
they got a guy.
I have the perfect comparison for you on that. The Mark 12. It's basically an M16 A1 lower on a DMR rifle.
Yeah.
So it has full auto.
Mark 21, Mark 12.
The Mark 12 has got full auto capabilities for a precision rifle. And if you, I was told, if you ever did shoot it on full auto or whatnot, your accuracy of the gun's done. The barrel's got to be redone.
Madras makes a good point here. He said he feels like Last Stand Hill, quotation marks, was more along the lines of being stuck there, but I feel like a significant number literally lost their mind and ran in different directions like the natives described. I think they did, and I think they killed themselves.
There were some suicides.
I don't know if Custer did or not. I personally believe he maybe didn't because he went earlier than a lot of people give him credit for, I think. Yeah, you think, Duke? Any thoughts on Custer suicide?
I don't buy it. Really, the death of Custer, I do buy in on that white. God dang, I can't think of his name. It was mentioned there earlier. White cow. I can't remember now. But anyway, he was the one that supposedly killed Custer, and the way he describes it is that he comes upon a man. The man fires at him with his rifle, misses, flings a rifle at him, misses, and goes to draw a pistol. And the warrior comes up. They fight over the pistol, and the warrior finally takes the pistol away from the guy, shoots him in the chest, and shoots him in the head.
Yeah.
And he says he doesn't know who the man is until after the fight's over, and he comes back on him and finds out that it's Custer.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's the most, it's a pretty accurate description because Custer was shot in the chest. He was shot in the head. But the thing is he was discredited. Yeah, White Bull Saboteur, thank you. I don't know why I was brain farting so hard on that. I think my brain's about fried. But anyway, he was discredited years later because when he went back to the battlefield, he says that he killed this man at this spot, which was about 50 yards away from where Custer had actually fallen. The thing of it is that this guy goes back quite a few years after. We're talking quite a long time afterwards. He's probably not going to know the exact spot that he killed Custer in because with the amount of smoke and dust, because as we said, Benteen says there's more smoke and dust he ever saw in any engagement in the Civil War. All that confusion, I doubt he would have been able to pinpoint the exact spot Custer fell. The fact he was within 50 yards, that's pretty darn close to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I honestly, I give more credit to that account than I really have seen in the others. And the whole thing of Custer shot himself in the head, I don't buy it. To me, he was so arrogant that I don't think he would have done that.
Another thing is, I also think there would have been, had he done it and when someone witnessed him doing it, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel there would have been zero mutilation to that body.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's, maybe some of the natives didn't go to church that Sunday or not, but that's kind of their thinking.
Yeah, and the thing of it is like I said, and even, White Bull said he did not know it was Custer until somebody told him.
Mm-hmm. Saboteur makes a good point. Camp was already in the process of breaking apart when they made the attack.
Yeah, they were in the process of getting ready to move because they've depleted the resources.
It's still a long way to Canada.
Yeah, and
I think they catch Sitting Bull if he digs in the night before.
And I don't think they really, at this point, had decided to go to Canada yet or not.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is that they had gathered up, a few weeks before because they had the big camp on the Rosebud. There was a big camp that Custer had come across where they'd had the Sundance at. This big camp, they were realizing that the resources are getting burned out. When you've got 10,000 people in one area, they're going to use up them resources big and hard.
You got to eat, and there's no supply line. Yeah. There's no supply
and that's
chain.
The other thing, too. There's one account, I don't remember what book it was in, where they talked about that Sitting Bull had told the warriors they could not hunt without specific permission because they did not want to use up all the resources in that area.
And your horses are not going to last.
Yeah.
Horses eat grass. They drag their roots out of the ground.
10,000 people there. There's going to be a lot more horses than that. 30, 40,000.
And by the way, guys,
that grass up fast.
That 10,000 number is the number that the woman that was what's her name? How can I think of her name?
Oh, I know who you're talking about. And I can't think of it either.
That's her account. I can think of the woman's name. I'll think about it later. A native woman's account. There's no way of knowing how many were there.
Yeah, she was the main one that they took her point of view for Son of the Morning Star. Kate Bighead.
Bighead, yes.
Let's see.
Yeah, Todd B said, Duke, I was talking earlier in the day or the day before. I realized Custer had zero time to find a defensive battle after the bullets started flying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hell, if he'd set up defenses, the day before, yeah, he might have. But at the same time, he might not have either. Because Rosebud, I'm going to go back to Rosebud again. Rosebud was actually a pretty equal engagement.
Mm-hmm.
Figure there's about 1,200 warriors that attacked Crook. Crook had 1,400 soldiers. That's on fairly even terms.
Mm-hmm. And think about the running chase with the Nez Perce. That's more of like what it would have become once that camp breaks up.
Yeah, and they just had to get lucky, and they caught the Nez Perce before they got to Canada.
Yeah, but I think that's what it would have been. It would have been that big chase, and they got him. I think they would have got Sitting Bull too. That's all they wanted. That's all they would have. It's not all they wanted, but that's all they had to have.
Because the whole thing of fleeing to Canada, that really starts to come in kind of after everybody starts to break up because they realize they're not going to be able to hold off.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of the natives went back to the east. American Horse, Crook went out in pursuit behind them. They were going back to the east. They ran into them at Slim Buttes. So east, or would be western South Dakota and North Dakota now. And Crook just happened to stumble upon him. It wasn't even Crook. It was a detachment of the cavalry that he'd sent out. Captain Mills of the 3rd Cav. He had sent him out because they still had fairly decent horses. By this point, Crook's used up and ate most of his mules and horses. So Mills is on his way down to Deadwood to try to get supplies for the troops. Happens to come across a small village. Looks it over, finds out there's a bigger village not too far away, and so he's got this decision. Do I continue with my orders, head for Deadwood, get supplies, and take a chance of being attacked from the rear and being completely wiped out, or do I attack this village now and prevent being attacked later on, but possibly get wiped out? And so he decides to attack. And he manages to hold out until Crook shows up. And unbeknownst to him, Crook had a habit of doing this, is when he gives somebody orders to march somewhere, he starts following right behind him. He did the same thing at the Reynolds fight. He does it here. orders Mills to go to Deadwood. He starts out behind Mills, and Crook happened to catch up. And they were able to find, attack American Horses Village, where they recovered Captain Mile Keogh's gloves and one of the 7th Cavalry guidons. But Mills got in a little bit of trouble with Crook for disobeying his orders and attacking that village when he had been told, don't attack anybody, just go get us some supplies.
Yep. And Madras said, from Terry's orders, then turned toward the Little Bighorn, feeling constantly, however to your left, as to preclude the escape of the Indians passing around to your left flank. That is the order. Bear in mind, Terry thinks we're tasting at most 400 or 500 natives.
Yeah, they had no idea exactly how many were in the field. That was one thing nobody really knew.
Terry's not going to have any clue how big this village is until after the battle.
Yeah.
Custer will know the night before and the morning of.
The other thing that Little Bighorn does is that once the agency natives, the ones that are stayed at the agencies because they don't want to be in the fight, they get word that Sitting Bull wiped out all these soldiers. All of a sudden, agency Indians start making their way towards Sitting Bull. So you get another flux of supporters coming in. And the soldiers at Fort Robinson were sent out to capture them. And then you have the skirmish at Warbonnet Creek where Buffalo Bill Cody killed Chief Yellowhand. Or Yellowhair.
The other wording in that order that I would take into consideration is feeling constantly. Terry's sending out a scout.
Yeah.
He is not sending out a search and destroy unit at this point.
No.
Yeah, he says because that's the way natives fought at the time. It has to do with the terrain.
And
Terry's in Terry's mind, he's going to see these 400 or 500 natives with maybe 300 or 400 warriors or less are going to see this cavalry unit show up and they're going to run.
Yeah.
And that's why he's saying right here to preclude their escape, keep the Indians from passing around to your left flank. When you're looking to the north, that's don't let them get to the mountains, right?
Yep.
And so that's fine. He in no way said attack that village.
Right.
In any way, shape, or form.
Well, he does say if viable.
If viable. But whole thing is right there is feeling constantly. And to me, that means send your scouts out and listen to them.
And Terry had done something similar with Major Reno. Just prior to sending out Custers, he told Major Reno, go out, don't cross this river, see if you can find the trail. Well, he finds the trail, crosses the river, and finds a village. And then he reports back. And he gets chastised for disobeying orders and crossing the river. But he also got a pretty good idea of where this group of people are going to be at.
Ethan said, I still can't believe it wasn't viable. You might have to comment, Ethan. I don't know what you were talking about.
I'll be right back. I got to go run again.
What was he talking about, Snapper? He doesn't believe it wasn't
I'm pretty sure he was talking about from earlier before, if attack the village, if viable.
He still doesn't believe it wasn't viable. He's been lied to, he says.
Yeah.
Been lied to. Doug Dukes, horses are destructive feeders. They rip the roots out no matter where they eat. Cows and buffalo are not like that. Yeah, horse and goats. If you got a village that big, you can't stay there because you can't even come back in the next 6 months because they've literally, like you said, ripped the roots out. That's how they eat. It's the way they're designed. They eat roots and everything. So Wild West said that explains the dust cloud of horses tearing out of the grass. He's being a wise guy, yeah. So yeah, we're getting ready to shut her down, guys. We've been going for almost 2 hours. Have we covered the thing
on that destructive feeding of horses?
Yeah.
Kind of reminded me of time we was taking care of a couple horses for a friend of ours. And he had this little area that he had fenced off around this old homestead out there to keep the livestock out of it. And he was getting to where he didn't want to buy hay. And so he says, I'll turn the horses out in there. This little area will feed them for a month. And when I say little area, it's a square about 200 feet on each side. And I very well remember Dad telling him that's not going to be enough to feed them for very long. And we go back out there the next day, and 2 horses had cleared a 200 by 200 foot square area overnight. And we're not talking small kochia weeds. These things are 6-7 foot high. Them horses completely devastated that because he'd been cutting back on their hay. They weren't getting enough feed to begin with.
Now multiply that by the time of several thousand.
Yeah. Because I forget, how many acres does it take to feed a horse for a month?
Oh, okay. If you, in the summertime, you're talking about 8-10 acres, maybe more per horse. Buffalo and cattle, the way their teeth are, they nip and cut the grass.
Yep.
Horses, sheep, and goats and hogs, especially hogs, but mostly horses, sheep, and goats, they don't cut it. They're blunt teeth. They grab it and they rip it out, and it's not coming back for a long time. You'll get weeds long before you get grass back.
Yep.
Olympic black powder rifle said, were there any 1873 infantry rifles used in the battle or nearby? I'll let you go first, Duke.
If I remember right, there were a couple that were captured from Rosebud.
Yeah, okay. Terry's guys. Some of Terry's guys had them. All right.
Yeah.
Some of the infantry units way back there. Not with Custer's group or any of the guys.
Crick had a couple companies of the 9th and 14th Infantry. Well, I'm having a brain fart here. Pretty sure it was 9th and the 18th or 14th. So he had a good number of infantry. When he went out on the Reynolds campaign, he had mostly cavalry. But on this one, if I remember right, it's not quite an even mix. I think he's got a little bit more cav than he's got infantry. But yeah, they was a few infantry rifles that were captured, not very many. Most of what was captured was cavalry carbines at Rosebud.
Ethan, you might have to elaborate on that because I don't know if I would agree. Ethan said I would have to say infantry support might have helped a little bit.
I think if they just had one good infantry soldier, they would have won.
That last 100 yards. They wanted that last 100 yards.
And here's the other thing on cavalry tactics versus infantry tactics. When you get, well, let's say it's the 200 infantry soldiers on a line, you have 200 soldiers firing. When you have 200 cavalry soldiers on the line, every fourth man is a horse holder.
Okay.
So you have cut back 25% of your force to take the horses back away from the skirmish line.
And evidently it's a military thing because Ethan said that Snapper was the only one that caught the sarcasm. I thought you were being serious.
See, we don't even need horses. We'll just carry each other into battle.
Yeah.
There you go. There you go. That's a good one. Well, guys, I think we've covered this wall to wall. And mostly we were just talking about the guns, but we got into tactics some too. But, and I just don't know, guys. I don't know how you can. First of all, I don't know how you can say that Custer lost because of the guns. And I don't know how you can say Custer lost for any other reason than his poor tactics.
Yep.
I mean, maybe you can make the argument on the day.
To show how bad of a tactical commander Custer was, during the Civil War, he had 11 horses shot out from under him. That tells you right there.
That means he's brave. He's brave.
It means he takes risks with other people's lives.
Yeah. Yeah, when you got a commander that gets that many horses shot out from under him, yeah. No,
he's somewhere a commander should not be.
He's not commander should be back telling the men where to go. He shouldn't be out in front telling the men to follow him.
How about,
I completely agree.
Jared,
they're the guy who gives the directions on how to fight, not the guy out there fighting.
A couple guns we didn't cover there, of course. Jared, 1860. What about Custer's rolling block? Yeah, boy. Rolling block lost that fight. If Custer had a Winchester, they'd have won that fight.
Well, his brother Tom had one. Didn't save him.
Oh, yeah. A Custer's rolling block, a custom-made 5070 sporterized rolling block. Doug Duke said Johnny Reb should have taken care of Custer. Sounds like they had every opportunity.
They in fact, him and one of my favorite characters from the Civil War, John Mosby, were head-to-head several times.
Yeah.
Because
iPod
Custer,
Walker
every time
said,
they-
with respect, tell that to Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great wasn't facing an army of firearms. But yeah,
this is true.
to that point, yes, he was always in there leading. Philip the Barbarian taught him that. Bang Bang, if you had one infantryman with a rolling block, it would have turned the tide.
Yeah.
All you need is one infantry with a bayonet. That's it. Not even the rifle to go with it. You know, to turn the tide.
Even if the soldiers were armed with 1876 Winchester rifles and let's just say they made them in 45-70. Even if they'd been armed with that,
you got to make 9 shots out of that tube count. Now, maybe you slow them down, and that's what a lot of people say. Well, if they'd had a higher rate of fire, they'd have slowed those natives down and made them stop. No, they wouldn't have.
No.
You put yourself there. Those of you that have wife and kids, there is a man with an army coming down a hill that has wiped out entire villages in the past.
Yep.
You outnumber him. No matter what happens. If it's me or my nieces or nephews or anybody like that, I don't care what. You know, I'm not saying I'm the bravest man in the world, but when I got an army of over 1,000 next to me, there's no way that guy's getting off that hill, no matter what the firepower is. Maybe if he has a A10 Warthog or whatever it is, maybe then. But you know, it's going to take a lot.
And the reality of it is from the minute Custer hit that village, it was a rout. It was a rout. The whole thing. From the minute he hit that village, it was a rout all the way to Last Stand Hill.
Let's talk about the guns that weren't there, Duke. One more time, let's address it, because iPod Walker asked, what about the Gatling guns not being there?
If Custer would have took the Gatling guns, he would have survived because he'd have been slowed down enough that they wouldn't have been there when he got there. Because the Gatling guns that he had, they're not the 45-70 model that, you know, you can crank out rounds. It's got the stick feed on top. It's going to dump, you know, a couple hundred rounds in a short order. The guns that he turned away were model 1869 1-inch bore guns. They didn't go pop, 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 pop. They went pop, 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 pop. And they weren't fed by a tube magazine either. They were fed by a hopper. You had soldiers that take a big handful of cartridges, come up to that hopper, dump them in, while some guy's cranking the handle, and then the next one come in and dump it in. So to run that gun, you need a crew of at least 4.
Yep.
And somewhere out there, let me see if I can find it, and then Garrett, maybe you can find it here. Let's see.
What do you got?
See if I can find the picture. There it is. Let's see if I can find.
The military guys are having a good inside joke going on.
So if you type it on Google, Custer's Gatling guns, and it's the third picture there. If you could pull that up.
Third picture. Okay, that's not pictures. Hang on. Is it the one on YouTube? The YouTube picture?
No, I just went to Google and looked.
Black and white or colored?
It's black and white.
3 guys standing behind it?
Yeah. There's actually 4. 5.
Gotcha.
It's on True West magazine.
Got it.
I'll have them pull this up here. Then you can see what I'm talking about.
Well, there it is. There
it is. Yep. A little grainy, but there it is. So those are guns at Fort Abraham Lincoln. And so there's actually, this is cropped down. There's 2 Gatling guns side by side, and they were the 2 that Custer turned away. See the size of that gun? That is a 1-inch bore Gatling. Off on the side is the hopper. So as you're looking at the gun, it's on the right-hand side. There's a hopper there where they dump the shells in. It takes 1 man to crank the crank. The 2 men back there by the chest are going to be the ones that are bringing up ammo. The one guy leaning on the wheel is going to be the one throwing the ammo into the hopper. The rate of fire on that gun is not a very high rate. It's like I said, kind of pop, 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 pop. Because if you've ever turned a crank on a Gatling gun, it doesn't go. Brrr. It's very slow. It's hard. You've got to crank and cock.
Now, Duke, I saw Jonah Hex fire 2 of those things off horseback.
I tell you what, you put one of those on a horse, and that horse go to stand up like that, he's going to fall over, and the gun's going to kill him.
Yeah. Another point I might make for this is they would have had to scout a road.
Yeah.
To bring
That's
those
why
in.
it would have slowed him down. So that Gatling gun is going to attach up to that chest. That chest is the limber. That's where the ammunition's at. Behind that, with the spare wheels, the caissons. So you got to have all of those to operate this gun. Now, 1-inch bore with that, yeah, it's going to put down some extra fire. The other problem that they have is that with the black powder, the Gatling gun was a little bit ahead of its time, because with the black powder on these 1-inch bore guns, they fouled out very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to get 1, maybe 2 shots out of each barrel, and then you're going to jam.
Yep. And just to ride onto the point that you said he would have won if he brought him, because it would have slowed him down. Once again, by the time he gets there, the camps broke up. They go after Sitting Bull's smaller camp, and once again, I think they win.
Well, I don't think he would have won. He just would have survived.
Yeah, well, I think he would have never been on that hill, like you said.
If he'd had arrived with these Gatling guns, it wouldn't have made any difference.
But that's true too. But what I'm saying is, he was, like Saboteur said, the camp's already breaking up by the time he gets there without them. They're gone by the time he gets there with the Gatling guns. And I still think he wins because, like I said, smaller camps now after that.
The thing you got to take into account too is that when you show up on the field with that gun, you have to unlimber it. And you got to take the horses off of the limber to get them out of the way so they don't get killed. It takes a few minutes to set that gun up. And that's one of the reasons why artillery was not really effective in field combat, with the exception of when it's used against villages and when it's used as defensive operations. Because it takes so long to set up artillery. And these Gatling guns were considered artillery pieces. They were not machine guns or anything like that. They were in artillery. They were often assigned to artillery units. So it takes a while to set that up.
Yeah. I know that Snapper's having a wonderful time with this conversation, and it's just going over my head, so I'm just glad you guys are having a great time.
This last bit, though, is kind of funny because I'd have to say with Ethan, also remember that one private who took the school? Then he looks at the dagger and realizes that he's actually giving his location out instead of the enemy's location on the 6-digit grid. I have seen that so many times.
Yeah.
Call for fire on your own self.
Yep. And I see Todd B commented that Gibbon had artillery at Big Hole. Yes, he did. And the Indians took the artillery away from him and run the cannons down the river.
Well, it's better than some
and
things.
Nez Pierce still have a song that they sing about that instant.
Yeah, that's a whole different point that I've got into talk. I've talked to Josh, I think, Wild West Extravaganza about it a little bit. How that the intimidation factor around a fort with that kind of stuff is great, but it's very hard to make useful use of it out against natives on the open prairie.
Yep. And when Grattan went down to the village in 1854, he took 2 artillery pieces. Guess what? They wound up in the river. They were good for 1 shot, and then they wind up in the river.
And he won. Oh, no, not Grattan. Why did I think that's Sand Creek? I'm thinking of the artillery at Sand Creek.
Sand Creek, they took 4 artillery pieces, and they were used to great effect, and it was a massacre. They were raining down spherical case shot, which there's 4 types of ammunitions that the cannons are using at that time. They're solid. You didn't see that used on the planes because it's basically worthless. You had shell, which is a big hollow ball filled with black powder, explodes, puts about 15 to 18 pieces of shrapnel down upon whatever you're shooting at. Then you had spherical case shot, and I forget how many rounds, but it's filled with 69 caliber musket balls. It's a little bit thinner walled of a case, but it's got the range out there. And then in amongst those balls is black powder, so when it blows up, now you've got 30, 40 pieces of shrapnel raining down. And then you had canister. and canister, and it's kind of like grape shot. It's a big coffee can full of 140 some odd 69 caliber musket balls. That thing's got a max range of 300 yards. Spherical case will reach out to 600 yards, 600 to 800 yards. And in a 12-pound mountain, that's in 12-pound mountain howitzer. And then the shell will reach out to 1,000.
I don't know, Snapper. Is this a real question? Or is that part of the joke?
I think that's for you. I can't barely even read it.
I don't even think caltrops were part of the U.S. Army's ordinance. I've never seen them mentioned.
I don't even know what a caltrop is, so that shows.
It's
I don't either.
You know those games that girls play with jacks?
Uh-huh.
Big metal jack with sharp ends on
Oh, yeah, for horse hooves. Yeah, okay, yeah. Well, you're
it.
talking
Horse hooves and does number on tires, too.
World War I style stuff. Yeah, okay. Gray Pilgrim's in here. Hey.
Hey, Gray.
Gray Pilgrim asked, what were the little 3-man mortars they used? Had them in the Civil War.
Well, yeah, they did have mortars. Those were around, and that's for shooting a exploding shell up over a wall. So that's the other thing you had for cannons. You had multiple types. You had, after the Civil War, you got Gatling guns, which are artillery. You've got howitzers, which howitzers fire. They kind of fire at an arc. So they're kind of the halfway between a gun and a mortar. Mortar is high arc, lob it over a wall. A gun is for shooting at long distance. If you rifle it, if it's a rifle gun, that's for precision shooting. That's for, putting the round in the pickle barrel. Most of the guns, rifle guns, are used for coastal defense because, you want to put the round through a ship. And Napoleons, howitzers, those are actually used out on the plains. And most of the time on the plains, it's going to be a 12-pound mountain howitzer because they're the lightest. They're the easiest to transport. You can take them apart. You can put them on mules and transport them through rough country. Napoleons were used, but mostly they were used for defensive operations around forts and such. So like up at Julesburg, Fort Sedgwick or Fort Rankin, it had both of those names. When the Cheyenne attacked, Cheyenne Arapaho and Lakota attacked Julesburg, they attacked Fort Rankin. Fort Rankin had a couple 12-pound mountain howitzers and a couple Napoleon guns. At that time, the charges were separate from the rounds. By the time you get in the 1870s, their 12-pound mountain howitzers are using a one-piece unit. But the commander ordered that the guns be charged half charge to give a false sense of security so they could draw the natives in, then hit them with the full charges. But anyway, the big guns were being used for defensive.
Yeah.
But when they would send somebody out in the field, they always took a 12-pound mountain howitzer. So at Sand Creek, they took a 12-pound mountain howitzer. When at the Fetterman fight, when Ten Eyck went up and seen what had happened on the other side of the hill, he called back for reinforcements. They brought a 12-pound mountain howitzer. When they sent out soldiers for the hayfield fight to relieve the hayfield, they took a 12-pound mountain howitzer. And the same thing at Wagon Box. Those were the ones that were the easiest to transport and move around. Because with a 12-pound mountain howitzer, 2 men can move that cannon. I can move that cannon by myself if I try hard enough, as long as it ain't real rough terrain. But 2 people can move that cannon around. It's pretty light. You're not going to do that with a Napoleon gun. Yeah. Or with a big field howitzer. A 24-pound field howitzer, forget it. That thing's really heavy.
It's good for setting inside the armory at the fort.
Yeah. With the 12-pounder, yeah, you can get up, you can move that around. Like I said, it can be packed on a mule. Shouldn't be fired off of a mule. There were soldiers that did that one time, playing a joke up at Fort Benton in the 1850s when they were bringing the Blackfeet in for a peace council, and they decided, they put a fuse in the thing on the mule's back and loaded up with canister shot just to surprise the Indians, saying, hey, our mules can fire too. And as the mule's sitting there and this fuse is hissing, he becomes uneasy from the hissing noise, starts spinning in circles, and then the soldiers realize, oh crap, we screwed up. Everybody cover except for the Blackfeet. They're standing there like, what the hell are these crazy white guys doing? So I said a bad word, oh well. And then the gun goes off, sprays canister across the front of the fort, and blows the mule off the bank and into the river. And both the gun and the animal were lost.
Well, I can tell you right
That's
now,
why-
the
that
military
is
has
why
not
I-
changed.
That's why I love having a friend who has been in several historic museums doing work. You don't get those kind of stories from anybody.
No.
You gotta be a bona fide museum worker to know that kind of thing.
If you watch them when they shoot live rounds out of these cannons at cannon shoots and stuff, the field howitzers, the Napoleon guns, the rifles, when they fire with their full charge, they roll back 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot sometimes. Watch when a 12-pound mountain howitzer fires.
Stand back.
That gun rolls 16 yards. And a friend of mine up at Fort Laramie, when he went to black powder school, they fired live rounds at that time. And when I say live rounds, they took a concrete ball that weighed about the approximate weight of what a round would weigh, and they would fire that. And he said when they got up there on the line, they fired that cannon, and the safety officer yelled, "Stop, nobody move." And usually when they do that, somebody has done something very wrong. Well, what he wanted to do was go get his camera and come back and take a picture, because you've got your soldiers here in a perfect square, because when they're firing a cannon,
There's nothing in the middle.
there's no cannon. That cannon rolled back clear out of view.
Oh,
And
that's
even with a blank,
good.
that 12-pound mountain howitzer would roll out there at Fort Laramie. We'd fire it, and it'd roll back a couple inches when we had green grass. And that one year it got real hot, and the dirt packed in real hard. And the last cannon firing we did, we pulled the lanyard on that cannon, and that cannon rolled back 18 inches with a blank.
Yeah.
That had been a field howitzer, it wouldn't have hardly moved at all.
I
That was
fought
the one
Walker-
downside to that mountain howitzer. The benefit of it being light and easy to move meant that it was light, and the recoil would send it back.
That's why by the time that you start getting into the 1880s, we're using Hotchkiss mountain guns. It's a little better setup.
Yeah, the Hotchkiss was
The way it's set, it don't recoil that far back.
And by the end of this campaign, because they were using the 12-pound mountain howitzers to an extent during the 1876 campaign, the commander started writing back saying this gun has become obsolete. It's becoming worthless to use. We need the new 76 model breech loading cannons, which were the Hotchkiss mountain guns.
Mhm.
And those things could fire and provide the same devastation that the 12-pound mountain howitzer could provide at the same range, or actually even a little further in some cases. And the fuse system was a hell of a lot more accurate than the 12-pound mountain howitzer, because sometimes them things would blow up past the target, before the target. If you're really unlucky, it'd blow up
in the gun
out of the muzzle of the gun and kill the entire cannon crew.
That's what Greg Pilgrim had just said. He had a flintlock hand mortar, mostly for shooting tennis balls. Yeah, because they used to light the fuse and then drop the bomb in there and then hope you didn't get a flash in the pan.
Yeah. Well, by that time with these 12-pound mountain howitzers, because the cannons used a carrot. So in that opening scene of Gods and Generals at Manassas, where he says 5-inch, 5-second fuse, well, the 5-second part he didn't need to call out because he already called out the length.
Mhm.
That's referring to the carrot.
Mhm.
And if you watch the Alamo, you see him when what's his name, Travis goes up, picks up the ball, takes out his knife, and pulls that fuse out. That's the carrot. So that carrot.
Doug Dukes is going to have to weigh in on that, because I don't think they had those at the Alamo. Do you know how long the Alamo would have held out if they had that?
Well, actually, the carrot was pretty common.
Yeah, but I don't think they used it on the Alamo. I don't think they could have, but it could just be my opinion.
Yeah, no, they used those because that was how you lobbed it over and killed the people inside the fort without actually going inside the fort.
Yeah, but you also have to remember that they laughed at during the Mexican-American War when they first fired on Zachary Taylor down there. The soldiers kind of laughed because the balls just bounced between the.
Yeah,
the Mexicans didn't have the amount of money they needed to have such things.
The thing of it is those carrots,
yeah,
really prone to moisture.
Yeah, that could be it too.
Now I forgot what the primer is, but the primer they swapped out and they went to a different priming system in the cannonballs. It was the oh god, I've had a real big brain fart on this one. Anyway, it was a pewter disc that's screwed into the front of the ball, and it had black powder lining it, and then it was marked in quarter-second increments.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot think of that primer. It starts with a B. Anyway.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Exactly what you're talking about, though.
So when the commander would call out, because the commander of the gun or the commander of the detachment, or the battery, I should say, would call out a range, the gunner, when they called out the range, he'd set the elevation on the tube, and then the guy back at the ammunition chest would pull out the round, look at the chart, figure out where he needed to stamp it in that quarter-second increment, punch a hole in it. That would be loaded in. Then when the cannon fired, that's what would set off the fuse.
Mm-hmm.
Borman fuse. That's what it is, the Borman fuse.
Okay, so one more aspect of this we haven't covered, and Josh Harris asked about it. And I'm going to let Duke go on this, because I appreciate Duke. He's carried the brunt of this because, well, obviously he's the guy who's done this for a living. But Joshua Harris said, didn't Custer attempt to get hostages thinking that he'd be able to shield himself? It's a whole nother theory.
That was the whole point of going to the other side of the village, and he rode right in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Because that's exactly what he did on the Washita.
Mm-hmm.
Go in, capture the women, the children, stagger them amongst the ranks, and then the natives won't fire back on the men because they're not going to take a chance of hitting their own.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of the idea at the Reynolds fight, because when Reynolds got there and he asked Frank Gerard, what do I do? And Gerard basically says, go in from all sides, don't let them get up in the rocks and capture them as they come out the other side of the village. They didn't do that. They got up in the rocks. If they'd have gone in and captured the women and children, that fight would have been done. That camp wouldn't have been involved in the fight. But didn't do that, and then the whole Northern Cheyenne decided that they were going to be in that fight.
Yep. Well, we're coming up on. We're coming up on 2.5 hours. Can you stay 4 more minutes, Snapper?
Yeah, I'll hang up 4 more minutes. I can make it.
All right. If you guys want to throw out any more comments or questions, we're going to go till for another 4 minutes, and we'll call it good after that. So I really appreciate you coming on this one, Duke. That's kind of the reason I was holding off, because you weren't available for a few weeks, but I knew I couldn't do this subject without you. I think that we've covered literally every aspect of this battle in the last 3 hours, or most of them. I don't know if our Battle of Little Bighorn Tales of the Trails thing is still up over there, because Duke did at one time a complete rundown in 4.5 hours.
Oh, yeah, we did the whole Indian Wars, and that's the first one we did on your channel.
The 76 campaign was, it may not be up anymore, but
it got taken down because
copyright.
Certain movie issues. Because Historic Movie Saturday kind of went down the drain.
No, that was not a copyright that took that down. However, I was scared of copyright when it was down, and so I erased all of them.
But if anybody's looking for good sources on the native accounts of these campaigns, Eli Richter, the first volume, which is the Indian interviews, they go into and they talk some about that, what happened. And then Jerome Green, he didn't write it. He put these accounts together. So these are accounts from different areas, but this is just on what happened through 1876 through 77. Mm-hmm. And so the Little Bighorn actually has, let's see here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 different views of what happened at the Little Bighorn fight.
Yeah. Madras said he bet John Wick could have turned the tide on Last Stand.
Oh, my God.
Okay, so Jay said, what other battle or fight are you guys going to cover next? Okay, so I want to explain to you, this is not what we generally do on the Reload Show. We came into this as a talking about the guns. That was the main focus. Every other week, most of the time, on Duke's channel, we do what's called Tales of the Trails, where we cover, and Duke I just read the comments and just let Duke go for a couple hours, and crazy good stories over there. And so that's what we do. And if you want to see more like this, kind of this format, go every other week on Duke's channel. We'll be doing Tales of the Trails most of the time anyway, unless Duke hasn't had time. Takes a lot of time to study for those kind of things.
Right. And what I've been working on here for the last couple of weeks is I've been trying to put together a podcast. So I've decided I'm going to try to do that. And it takes a lot of work. So mine that I've been trying to do is I've been trying to get into a little bit more detail. And so I decided to start doing one on Red Cloud's War. I've got one episode recorded. It's actually going to be episode probably 4, which is going to be the hayfield fight. Me and Garrett are going to be collaborating on that because I need him to provide some Western style music because I can't find anything online that I like to go with it.
We got hayfield and wagon box fight coming up quick. Oh, I can't wait. We got a different on our channel.
What I'm going to start on tonight and probably the next few nights is I'm going to start writing the script for Wagon Box. The other episodes, I got to figure out how I want to do it. But the episode that's going to precede or come before Hayfield will be Fetterman. And then I'm going to kind of set up 2 episodes. One's going to be, this is so far the plan, one's going to be just on the Bozeman Trail. Episode discussing what the Bozeman Trail was, why it was important. And then the first episode is what's going to lead up to Red Cloud's War, which is starting with Sand Creek and going through 1865. Because in reality, Red Cloud's War technically runs 1866 to 1868. But the Indian War of 1865, as it's often referred to as, actually played right into that. Yep. It's kind of the thing that leads up to it.
Yeah, Jay, the wagon box fight is epic. Yes, it's literally the opposite story that we've been talking about all day. But anyway,
I definitely have to agree with your brother Ethan, though. If Chuck Norris would have been there, they would have definitely won. And the main reason is think of these guys' face. If they would have seen a white man walk up and kill 2 rocks with 1 bird, they would have given up. They would have given up.
Oh, Jesus.
Oh, anyway, guys, are you guys got anything else to say there, Duke?
Yeah, I was just going to say for Tales of the Trails, I've started looking into a couple other things to talk about, and I did order a couple books.
Oh,
so, nice.
We're going to
that covering the 62.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the 1862 Dakota War.
Yeah, very good.
So I don't know how soon because I'm gonna, like I said, I'm working on this podcast, so that means I got to do a lot of reading. I can't read multiple things at once, so I'm going to have these things so messed up. I'm going to have Red Cloud out there in Minnesota.
I'm so excited. I've been pestering him to do the Minnesota conflict for 2 years.
And here's the thing: is Garrett wants me to do a different thing and a different thing. So he wanted the Northern Cheyenne Exodus, and now he wants the.
Well, I wanted the 62 battles before everything else. But anyway, we got to get going so Snapper can get out of here. I appreciate everybody coming out. Stay tuned. Next 3 or 4 weeks. I don't know if Duke's going to be able to get out here for the first part of it or not, but we'll be sometime in March. We'll be releasing the 1866 Trapdoor episode 2.
If you can hold off to the end of March, I think I can make it out there.
We'll make it one way, or we'll come to you one way or the other.
Well, we can shoot if I come out there.
Yeah, that's true. So anyway, stay tuned for that. Snapper, you got anything coming out?
No, I need to, though. I really do. I need to sit down and do some stuff. I've been having a lot of fun with my 2-wheeled horse, just going around, going vroom, vroom everywhere. So soon I will. I need to. I really need to. It's been a while since I released a video.
And Duke's pretty well told you what he's been working on with this podcast. By the way, anybody wants to know, go over and check out Duke Frazier Productions, if I didn't say already. If you're interested in this kind of video, he already has a backlog of Tales of the Trails over there that you can watch. It's pretty extensive. If you started right now, you might be done watching it by next week.
Yeah. And just as my disclaimer, I get things wrong. There's other folks that get things wrong in there because when you've got all the books I do, sometimes things, dates, numbers, what happened gets all squirreled up. So all I can say is, yeah, there will be errors in some of those earlier videos, but we do our best.
I just want to say thank you to all you guys streaming across 3 channels tonight. We set records. We've maxed out at 85 viewers across 3 channels.
Nice.
So
That's amazing.
And I always know when Duke's going to come in here and carry us to Little Bighorn, it's going to be a little big deal.
A little big deal.
Yeah. So appreciate you all coming out. You guys got anything else to say? Well,
have a good night, everybody.
As always, trust in God. Keep your powder dry. Bye.